Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Cambridgeshire County Council Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee. I'm chairing this meeting today in the absence of the chair, Councillor Lucy Netzinger, who has had a conflicting engagement elsewhere. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. May I ask, though, that everyone present turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. Please be aware that the meeting is being live streamed today and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting, you'll be glad to hear, and we will leave via the side doors and use the fire escape next to the kitchen to make our way to the assembly point in the car park. Those of you at home will need to make your own arrangements. So, apologies for absence is the first item, and declarations of interest. So I will ask the Democratic Services Manager to report any apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have apologies from Councillor Beckett and Councillor Navarro is substituting, from Councillor Goldsack, Councillor Keane is substituting, Councillor Nessinger and Councillor Christine Whelan is substituting, and Councillor Wilson and Councillor Wyatt is substituting, and Councillor Bowden.
Thank you very much indeed. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? Not seeing any. Thank you very much indeed. So the next item is to approve the minutes of the meeting and the special meeting of the committee held on 24th of June and 23rd of September respectively as an accurate record. If any member does not agree, would you please raise your hand now? So I see no objections to that. So we will approve the minutes as an accurate record in both cases. An updated action log is also included in the published papers for the meeting. Most of the actions are complete with 3 ongoing. Does anybody wish to raise anything in the action log? No? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Item 3 is petitions and public questions. We've received no petitions or public questions. Before we move on to item 4, I would like to move to the Chief Executive to ask him to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members, and apologies for this slightly unusual interjection before you move to main business. I wanted to use the opportunity with the Chair's permission to mention 2 council officers who are attending their last meeting of the Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee today. The first I would like to mention is sat to my left. Sue Grace, our Executive Director of Strategy and Partnerships. As members may be aware, Sue retires from the Council at the end of December. Sue has served this Council in a number of really important leadership roles over a number of years, and also undertook a significant role in leading this area's response to the COVID pandemic. Since 2023 and the restructuring, or actually since 2022 in the case of Sue, Sue took on a revised and broader portfolio, leading a range of functions that are really important to the way this council runs and interacts with other authorities. So, Chair, mindful of Sue's long, good service and superb leadership contribution to the authority, I thought it important members were given the opportunity to recognise that at her final committee attendance before she retires. The second officer I would like to particularly mention, and probably equally embarrassed because I can almost feel it radiating off Sue right now, the second officer I would like to equally mention will be in attendance later on for the committee today when you receive the report on health and safety. As members were made aware in Chair's announcements at full council on Tuesday of this week, Janet Atkin, our Service Director, Human Resources, is also due to retire from the council. In fact, Janet retires at the end of this month. Janet will be in attendance to present the health and safety report that members are receiving for debate and discussion later, but I particularly wanted to highlight her extensive contribution to the authority, given again that this will be her last attendance at a council committee meeting. So, Chair, thank you for the opportunity to recognise both officers. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much indeed. On a personal note, Sue was actually the first county council officer I ever met, because in February 2014, when I was first elected to this council in a by-election, it was Sue who came along to the count with my declaration of acceptance of office form for me to sign. So I've known Sue as an officer for over 10 years now and have always been deeply impressed by her quiet competence and her ability to get the best out of the people she works with and the contribution that she has made to this council over a very long time. So I shall miss Sue tremendously and everything that she has done for Cambridgeshire in this place, and I wish her extremely well. Janet, I believe, will be online later. In person later, right? I thought that was online. In person later. So yes, Janet has also served this authority for a long time and done a really important job and done it superbly well. So Janet will be deeply missed as well. If there's anyone who would like to make any further comment, please let me know. Otherwise, I shall move on. But right, okay. On to item 4 then, which is the Integrated Finance Monitoring Report for period 5, 2025 to 26. And the Head of Finance will introduce the report. So Stephen, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. So this report presents the consolidated management accounts of the Council as at period 5 of 25-26 financial year, and gives a comprehensive overview of the Council's financial position covering revenue budgets, the capital programme and the balance sheet. And as well as that, several recommendations are proposed to you today relating to financial management, which I'll come to in turn. But to summarise, firstly, the Council's revenue budget shows a forecast pressure for the year of £12.3 million. And while that's an improved position from that seen at the start of the year by this committee, it still represents a significant overspend and would, if it materialises at the end of the year, have an unsustainable impact on the Council's reserves, and consequently action continues to be taken to try to address it over the second half of this year. The overall drivers of that forecast position remain broadly the same as reported previously, namely the national issue with rising costs of placements for higher need children in care, higher home to school transport costs, and reduced income from the NHS for joint funded care services for people with learning disabilities. As well as that, there are smaller pressures relating to capital financing costs due to higher interest rates and needing to borrow earlier in the year, and lower than expected income in several services. Within forecasts across the Council are a number of key actions that have been taken or will be taken to mitigate the pressures that we are facing, and those are set out in the report. Offsetting those pressures is corporate funding provision that was agreed in the business plan, and through this paper at recommendation A, formal allocation of that funding is proposed as a budget environment. So that would see the corporate funding pot dispersed to key pressure areas, and the summary table on page 35 at 2.1.1 presents the revenue position both with and without this proposed environment, given the scale of it. I'll also briefly draw committee's attention to recommendation B, which is also a proposed budget environment, in this case to update adult social care budgets with the latest relative split of costs, which is an exercise that is undertaken annually as well. Turning to the dedicated schools grant funded budgets, the forecast on that has worsened through this report. Committee will recall at the last update there was an in-year and cumulative deficit projection, and that has now worsened to an in-year projected deficit of £32.5 million and consequently a cumulative deficit of around £95 million. This issue and the scale of it is common to most councils with these responsibilities and results from government funding fundamentally not keeping pace with changes in need, particularly following reforms in the area several years ago. The deficit is still ring-fenced under current regulations through to March 2028, so technically isn't formally a pressure on the Council's general fund budget, but nevertheless it represents real cash spent in excess of funding, and there's a resulting approximate £3.5 million a year cost to us from having to borrow funding earlier in the year than expected, so an increase in capital financing costs or borrowing costs. And it also represents a major medium-term risk without national reforms, which news yesterday suggests have been delayed at least until next year now as well. Then turning briefly to the capital programme, through this report, a balanced budget position is forecast with the net capital budget for the Council expecting to be fully spent in lines with plans set by the Council. Recommendation C is a small or relatively small capital budget environment proposed to correct the annual rebaselining exercise the committee agreed at its last meeting, enabling funding for one scheme to be carried from last year to enable costs to be met, which was omitted. Finally, Chair, turning to the Council's balance sheet, particularly bring attention to the usable reserves and the forecast use of them that is set out in the report, and through recommendation D, which proposes to allocate earmarked reserves from several pots to fund performance improvement work in special educational needs and disabilities, which follows Children and Young People's Committee's endorsement of a plan to focus additional capacity to address the timeliness of cases and casework within that service. The funding allocation will be temporary, with ongoing costs to be met within the service area. But I will leave the introduction there. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Stephen, does anybody have any questions for Stephen on anything that he has said or on the report? Councillor Meschini and then Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Stephen. It's just a clarification question on 4.5.1, which is in the annex. Now, I have no problem with any of it, but I just don't understand the wording. So are we late with this project and therefore we never paid what we were supposed to pay and now we have to pay it because we caught up? Or are we early?
The original expected phasing of this capital scheme was that funding would be complete, the spend and funding therefore would be completed at the last financial year. As with several schemes, sometimes there is slippage, and one of the annual exercises this committee does is to re-baseline the capital programme to transfer funding and budget into the correct year relative to when spend is expected to take place. So this scheme is expected to have spend in 25-26 and consequently needs budget and funding allocated to it this year, and that should have been done through the rebaselining exercise that came to the last committee meeting, but it was not included.
So if we had included it in the rebaselining, would it have been as a result of the funding having been allocated early and not needed until later? Is that what's happened?
I think I'd probably categorise it as more the spend has taken a bit longer than expected, so it slipped a bit.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, there was another hand. It's Councillor Martin, sorry.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report, Stephen. Just a couple of questions of clarification, if you're happy for me to take them one at a time, Chair. So the first one is, obviously we've got the savings table in front of us with the different ratings. At what point are the red and black savings crystallised as overspends, if that's the way that it's baked into the budget?
So generally speaking, if they're in the savings forecast as a pressure, as an under delivery, that should be in the forecast that is before you in the relevant service areas, and I think that is the case. They'll obviously then be considered in terms of business planning for next year as well and through the next item. But generally speaking, we'd expect those to be picked up, if not later in the year, and the forecast adjusters next year instead.
Thank you. And then the next question is, so looking at 5.3.1, looking at the amount of outstanding debt that we're holding, particularly around adult social care. Again, when will we see that, Chris? At what point do we say that that's then going to be a overspend within our budget because we haven't been able to retrieve that money? Obviously, it'll be capital rather than revenue, I assume, or does it come under revenue as well?
So there's two ways this can manifest. So firstly, it would be revenue pressure if it did materialize. So firstly, we are required to do an exercise to make a provision for what's called a provision for doubtful debts, technically, at the end of each year. Although as we head into the second half of the year, we start looking at that, and that sort of looks at the age and the type of debt, and we're required to make an accounting provision for part of debt that generally that is old. So this can have a direct revenue impact if we have to increase that provision each year. That's not always the case because we carry the provision year to year in the balance sheet. If the debt is written off, that would obviously result in a revenue pressure as well, and may come before the committee to approve.
I've also got a further comment from our Section 151 officer.
Thank you, Chair. If I may through you, this may seem a bit like Groundhog Day. The position with debt has continued to be monitored through the Audit and Accounts Committee, but also now I think it's an issue that's been raised at the Adult and Health Committee. So I just wanted to flag that it's also being reported through those committees.
So-
Thank
Sorry,
you.
Chair,
Sorry.
just one more question.
One more question, yep.
No, thank you for that. And then the final question is, you mentioned at the start about the current pressures that we have are unsustainable. Have you forecast, so let's say that nothing improves, hopefully it does, and I know there's a lot of work going on to improve. At what stage do you think we're getting to we're hitting our minimum amount for our general reserves, and then at what stage do you think we could be at a 114 notice if things were to continue as they currently are?
If I perhaps hand over to Michael for that question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and sorry, through you, Chair. Thank you, Stephen. I mean, this is the wicked issue that we face. It's wicked one, because obviously we don't yet know with any certainty what the funding position is, and it's wicked too in terms of our forecast in terms of what we'll need as a result of the overspend. So what I will be doing is in January, I'll bring an update to committee on the Section 25 statement in terms of the budget forecast and the overall position. So that will give a picture in terms of setting the budget. At this moment in time, as Stephen's alluded to, the overspend position is significant. We need to do something in year, and we still have 6 months of the year remaining, so there is still action to be undertaken. And there's a number of actions and mitigating factors to the savings tab that was referenced in one of your earlier questions. So at this point in time, I'm confident that work is ongoing. We're introducing enhanced controls, and that gives me assurance as it stands at the moment. But clearly, it's something I will review and revisit in December and start to allude as we're building into the budget setting.
Okay, thank you. I should just say that in addition to Stephen Howarth and Michael Hudson as our Section 151 officer, we also have the executive directors Frank Jordan, Patrick Warren-Higgs and Martin Perbrick with us today, who can answer any specific detailed questions relating to their directorate that get raised. So I've now got 3 hands up. Councillor Young was first, then Councillor Ioannidis, and then Councillor Murphy.
Thank you. I've just got a few hopefully quick questions. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Okay, so I had a question about the adult social care debt. The report in 5.3.3 says that the dispute has been resolved. So I'm a bit puzzled. It was early in 25-26, a settlement was reached. So why is the debt still outstanding?
Is that just a matter of there might be a tense issue in part of that text to say that it wasn't outstanding, it was still outstanding. So that in relation to the NHS debt, the settlement was reached, and that is now out of the debt figures. Obviously, there's still a substantial stock of adult social care debt relating to individuals and their contributions to care, which is the subject of line 1 in table 5.3.1.
Oh, okay. So this is just ordinary, ongoing, normal operational debt. Okay, thank you. And is there any reason why that would be particularly, a bad debt? This is a NHS, a public body. Why on earth aren't they paying us?
I mean, that's a very good question about the time it takes for the NHS to pay us sometimes. But as I say, the big stock of NHS debt has been settled. There's ongoing debt relating to individual joint funding cases. Because of the nature of the NHS as a public body and usually the strong contractual case to income, we do not make much of a provision for bad debt against NHS debt.
I do have another question. So on page 94, we talk about the update, a favourable update to the business rates baseline. Could you just talk about a bit what that is? I didn't think we were affected by the business rates growth. in the county council. So
So the county council certainly is affected by business rates growth. We, while it's collected by district councils, we do see a share of business rates collected and the growth in that. The nature of the timing of business rates projections from the building authorities, we get an estimate at the start of the calendar year, which is usually what the business plan is based on. And then we get the final confirmed amounts for the year, usually the day of or day after we set our budget. So typically at the start of the year, there's the first forecast almost is the business rates funding update.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair. In relation, and bring us back to savings and mitigations in relation to the revenue overspend, I'd just like to know what is actually being in delivery now and not just identified, and sort of what the milestones are, because I'd like to see obviously improvement as we've seen going forward. We've improved slightly. I'd like to see that we're on track to improve further.
Stephen.
As an introduction, I think a lot of the mitigations are they're forecast in the projections. The extent to which they will be delivered or not, or in progress, will vary depending on them. I think the best way for that to be tracked is the individual Directorate Finance monitoring reports go to the relevant policy and service committees, and we'll have generally a lot more detail about the specific mitigations that are in process. And through subsequent updates to this committee, you'll see whether this position is moving or not as we go through the year.
Ask our Executive Director Finance to.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. It seems now in local government the holy grail is to balance a budget in year. It is something that is up and down the country when I look at my peers and our peer authorities in terms of what is being reported. And clearly that is something to address nationally, and we await the Fair Funding 2 review and what that will give. In relation to the savings position, we will note, members will note that this is a slight improvement since the last report to this committee. A number of the black and red savings that have been identified, Appendix 3, were identified and actually were discussed at this committee last time. And one of the focuses since the last committee has been a real effort in terms of the mitigating factors around those and drawing up additional savings plans. However, it was felt appropriate at the corporate leadership team that this was raised further in terms of needing to improve and enhance the financial controls that we've already got in operation through the Financial Transparency Panel that I chair. And as a result of that, we are introducing a series of new measures in terms of managing spend, particularly looking at essential spend and where that's needed as the key driver of things that we do as opposed to the non-essential spend. And so we've introduced challenges across the board to mitigate that. And that's why you'll see that in some directorates now there is spend below the original base budget in terms of trying to compensate that. So I am expecting and hoping that for the December report, this will come down further. I am privy to internal reports because we only bring this quarterly to this committee, but monthly to the corporate leadership team. We have seen a further fall in relation to the last period. So that is encouraging. But again, there is still some way to go. So it may be that there are further actions that come forward to the December committee that will be needed to drive that forward. So it is absolutely the forefront of the corporate leadership's attention.
Just a quick follow up on that. So we do have things currently in delivery at the moment. Is that what we're saying? But there is obviously further considerations to take place in order to reduce that further.
Yes, through you, Chair, if I could just come back. Yes, if we look right the way across the board, all executive directors have been tasked to look at their spend and how they manage that spend and what actions they can do in terms of managing that position. And I'm pleased to say that that is made significant progress. But if there are further actions that need to be taken and in the political domain, they'll be brought to the December meeting.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Murphy. Your
Thank
turn
you.
to
Sorry, it
shine.
is now my turn. I do apologise for butting in before. I've just got a few quick questions. I think starting with Annex B, page 5, we've got legal costs. Am I right in reading that there's a significant overspend so far this year, or have I not read that right?
You're correct in the reading. Yes, there's a significant overspend on the central legal budget. It predominantly relates to the increased cost of litigation and legal cases around children in care. Yeah.
Thank you. And going back to Annex 1, there's on page 35, there's one of the residential strategy children in care placement saving. Could you please, it's not entirely clear to me what the investment, there's been an investment set aside, but the project hasn't gone ahead, and therefore there's giving back the investment, but also there's the loss of the saving. So have I read that right? And what is the net position then?
I'll have to double check the exact figures on the net position if that is needed. As you said, the expectation is that the investment will not be fully needed just due to the business case for that not completely stacking up with the saving as it's been further developed since the business plan was set.
It's just that I think the way it's written is a little bit telescoped. So is Martin able to assist? Thank you.
So the can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So the residential strategy originally related to 2 farmhouse buildings, which would be converted into our own children's homes. Delays in delivering those children's homes partly through the planning process has meant that they're not going to be delivered this year. There was revenue budget set aside to support those properties should they have come in the timeline, but they didn't. So that money can be released this year because it won't be needed. So that's what you're seeing on that aspect, and the rest of the rest of the timeline. They're going to hopefully we'll have planning responses this year, but there are other issues affecting the delivery of those projects and their timelines, so that might be elongated further. There were obviously savings set aside against those projects should they have gone live in the timeline that was originally set out, and that saving is not going to be met because the buildings aren't ready and they're not going to be available for use.
Thank you. So that would be 650k of investment, which can then be released, and then there's a net budget impact of minus 581k.
That's correct. Yeah.
So I wasn't quite sure how the intended savings was 1.2 million, but I will persevere because I think the story is clear. And if I could just mention a third sort of point of clarification, and this is about the Annex A, page 13, the SEND, and yes, page 13C, the recommendation to via funding for SEND for the EHCP processes. I do strongly support that, but and maybe we can come back to this in the corporate performance. I think it's so important for this council. It is so high profile and so critical that it would be really important for the reporting on this to come back to the committee so we can review how that investment is being used and how progress is being made, but perhaps come back to that at the corporate reporting. Yeah. That's all right.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have Councillor Navarro indicating with a question, and then Councillor Hathorn, and then I'll ask the Chief Executive to say something before we move into debate.
Thank you, Chair. Back to the adult social care debt. Has the Council explored whether the high levels of unpaid adult social care debt are contributing to a culture of, from some users to feel entitled not to pay, perhaps assuming that the council is unlikely to recover? And is the new digital billing system showing or expected to improve compliance and shifting that perception?
Over to the Executive Director of Adults Health and Commissioning for that.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So I think there are a number of reasons for the levels of social care debt. There are some people who don't want to pay, but there are many other people who, through their disability or through their condition, means that they're not able to pay, and therefore we have to support them, and that's either supported through families or other. If you look at the profile of the debt, we have an increasing number of debt as a result of deaths. So once somebody passes away, there's a requirement for us to then pursue the estate for the contribution that we've assessed them for, and that might not be as easily just to go and raise an invoice for whoever's dealing with the estate, because they might have to go through probate, etc. So that adds to the length of time, and sometimes families have not been as engaged as the person, and therefore they're trying to understand their own finances so that they can make those payments. So that the Alison and the team that work in the kind of debt recovery are they do profiles on all of the different amounts. Some of it's through the court protection, because people don't have capacity to manage their own finances, and therefore we have to go through a court process in order to get approvals and access to be able to collect some of that income. Some of it's through deaths, and some of it's through estates, and some of it's through people who've not paid because they haven't given us the details and the information to enable us to assess people correctly. And therefore, once we receive that information, we then have to do some retrospective charging, but all the time there's a level of debt that's raising against that particular person. So there's a number of pieces of work. We have different approaches to all of those different ways that the debt's been created. And some are more successful than others, just due to the nature of and the complexity of those particular elements.
Okay, thank you. I'll come very briefly.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just on that point in particular, is that breakdown reported to the Adults Health Committee? If so, could that be reported here as well? Because it'd be useful to try and find out, as Councillor Navarro was raising, whether it is people that are just avoiding paying, knowing that or hoping that the council doesn't come after them, versus those that are having difficulty, which the council are working with and being very diligent to work with to ensure that we can recover that. Is that breakdown reported somewhere? Thank you, Chair.
It's broken down. It's broken down into certain elements, and I'm sure we can make sure that that's available here. We do report that through. We keep a track of that because we're overseeing. Because some of our relationship, if it's through the court of protection, it's about making sure that we're having conversations with the court process around how we can expedite that. And if it's through other means, then we track it. So we're having conversation with solicitors or family members, etc. But I'm sure we can. I could see Michael's indicating, so Michael might want to come in as 151.
Yeah, if I can just say in answer specifically to the question, my understanding is that firstly, the reports that go to Adults and Health Committee are available to everybody to read, and I think I would want to urge non-duplication of reports and the same reports going to various committees. I understand there is also a different version of that report, a different version of the data, same data just presented differently, that goes to Audit and Accounts Committee as well. So it is reported in a number of places that are accessible for all members to read if they have an interest in that. But I'll bring in Michael Hudson now to add to that.
I wasn't going to say much more than that, actually, Chair. I think that whole matrix system, in terms of where we're at, in terms of reported to the Accounts and Audit Committee, which is where Audit and Accounts Committee, get it right way around, which is where this started from a control environment perspective, and the next report is coming the 28th of November in terms of the follow-up of that. And again, those papers are available, but it's now been picked up within Adult Health and Commissioning, Adult Health Committee, because also that committee has looked at the overall consequences and impact on the community. So there is data available, and it was as a result of that this data then was reported to this committee. So it came into the IFMR Integrated Financial Monitoring Report about 12 months ago as a report, but we'll continue to look at that in terms of the context between the three committees and how we look at that. But it's brought here as much for the risk assessment and the balance sheet, which I think was one of your or somebody's earlier question related to, and that's where we focus it upon.
Right. Moving on, I've seen one more hand go up, which was Councillor Wyatt, and then I will bring the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. I have a fairly general question, so I understand if you're not able to answer it immediately and in detail. But having a look at all of the variety of savings that we're making, I just wondered if it was possible to comment on what proportion of these savings that we're making are made through process change and efficiency increases versus cutting of provision.
I can't give you an exact breakdown off the top of my head, but the nature of the savings proposals that are in the business plan are set out in the business plan itself. So the business plan has quite a detailed table which lists all the savings that are applied to each directorate, and that will describe the nature of the saving, whether it's a technical adjustment, whether it's reduction of provision, or whether it's a policy change or something like that. So that's probably the best way to look through it. So there's a reference number attached to all the savings, and they can be sort of tracked through back to the business plan documents that are on the council's website. The business planning papers themselves, as they start to go through committees commencing after this item, will also give more information about the nature of the savings that are in the proposed budget as well.
Thank you. If I may ask a quick follow. That's very fair, and I'm probably going to be able to read every single report eventually. But would it be possible to request that we could get summaries of like that kind of thing as part of this meeting? Like, can we have an assessment of how much is a process saving versus how much of it is a cut?
Can take that back for consideration. It's an emerging picture, but I will take that back and ask what it's possible to provide members. Okay, thank you. And Councillor Hathorn, I overlooked.
So it's about the dedicated schools grant. So I've kind of got three questions. One, I don't understand the table. I'm not sure if I don't understand the accounting treatment, I've missed something or there's a typo. It says the opening deficit balance 25-26 is 62.8 million. In your movement 332.5, and then the closing deficit balance 24-25 is 95.3, and then in the commentary it says the projected deficit is 95.3 million. I don't understand. Is that correct? Or it's 2.2.2?
Yeah, apologies. The error there is the bottom line of that table at 2.2.2 should read closing deficit balance 25-26.
Right, fine. That's great.
Yeah, wrong.
That makes that a lot clearer. At least I understand what's going on. Is it the case that it's growing faster, or is it the case that we're hopeful that the safety valve payment will mean that the speed of the growth isn't accelerating? And we've had a verbal commentary that other local authorities are in the same position. Presumably we're part of a pack. It would be helpful to know, I think, sort of where we sit in that pack. Are we sort of in the middle? Because that is more reassuring than being at one end of that pack.
The Executive Director of Children Education Families or the 151 officer might want to comment on the safety valve, I think.
Okay, Martin, and then Michael.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. So yeah, I would say most local authorities in the country are in have a deficit position on this budget. Smaller local authorities may be able to manage it slightly differently, but certainly large local authorities, it is in relation to the general funding of education. There are a number of different strings which make up this position for large local authorities. Our funding position, our funding for education is one of those. The demand that we have in our local area, which is increasing for EHCP assessments and then subsequent specialist school placements, and the sufficiency we have for special schools in the Cambridgeshire area. So part of our original safety valve agreement was for the Department of Education to deliver 2 special schools in Cambridgeshire. They haven't delivered those special schools, and they have paused the special school free school program. So we are unclear from the Department of Education as to when those schools will be delivered. Without those schools, that will mean that more children will need to go to specialist independent education provision to meet their needs, and that will increase the costs on here. Where we are in relation to other local authorities, I probably couldn't tell you. I feel like we're somewhere in the middle of the pack, but maybe Michael has more detail on that. But that's the reason why this the deficit on this is growing in year and in subsequent years.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Marcy for those earlier points. Just to put it in perspective, in relation to the national position, it's my understanding at the last count there was 104 out of 151 upper tier authorities that were in a deficit position. I think that position by the end of the year will be significantly more. If we look across to our neighbours in Peterborough, they've just gone into a deficit for the first time in a number of years. Other organisations like Nottingham following suit. So I think that will be a higher number. In terms of comparators, if members want to turn to Warwickshire, for example, where a state of emergency was declared, their deficit is double our deficit, same for the likes of Worcestershire and Kent and other places. So in the context, there is a survey that's just been completed, and the County Council network is lobbying government for change on this, and it's estimated that by the end of this financial year, the national deficit position will be £12.2 billion. And by the end of the decade, it will be £17 billion. So that is a huge national issue that needs to be addressed. It needs both the deficit addressment, but it also needs the reform of the system in order to either through funding that deficit going forward so that the system doesn't need to be reformed, or through reforming that impact. And we're likely to hear that now. I think it's slipped back even further to the start of the next year in terms of any announcements on that. So this is a significant issue, but we sit pretty much in the middle of the pack, but it's still not good. And I think the statutory override that takes it off our balance sheet is not the way to keep addressing this by ignoring it. We need to continually flag this and make sure that government are aware and are doing something with this.
Thank you. Finally, to the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, that follows on very well. Michael touched on one of the points I wanted to raise, but if I can draw members' attention to paragraph 228 in the report on page 38 of your pack, we highlight there that Cambridgeshire is very similar in regard to SEND services compared to other councils. But I think the key thing I was wanting to highlight was the point Michael's just drawn out slightly. We were promised by government there would be a schools white paper published in the autumn of this year. As of yesterday, the Education Secretary wrote to the Chair of the Education Select Committee confirming that that would not now be the case and that there would not be a schools white paper published until early next year, with no precise date provided. I have to say that whilst that delay will potentially allow for greater opportunity to co-produce the next set of reforms for the SEND service, particularly with parents and carers, which is really important, that delay does not help us or any other council that is currently having to address these particular pressures and issues. And what I found particularly notable, Chair, was the Education Secretary's letter actually made little if no reference to the role of local government as one of the key players in the SEND system. So I think I have ongoing concerns, as I've had for some time, around the slowness of any attempt to reform the SEND system nationally, but what that does locally in terms of our finances continues to be a significant pressure point. Michael has said we, as a number of other county councils are doing, will continue to lobby government hard for that and continue to provide evidence to support why the system does need reformed. And if I'm being blunt, Chair, it's not reform simply from a financial perspective. The system needs reform because it needs to better address outcomes for children and young people. It needs to better emphasise the role of schools to provide support for children and young people in a mainstream setting, not just specialist settings. So this is a system, quite frankly, that is broken both nationally, and we see the implications of that arising locally, which is why I would also just like to make the point that whilst we recognise all those pressures and see them manifest here in Cambridgeshire, I wouldn't want to underestimate how hard our staff in the SEND service are working. They are dealing with what can be best described as some of the most challenging, emotive and difficult issues to support families, parents, carers and children and young people with, but at the same time are carrying significant caseloads and having to deal with hugely complex and challenging issues. So I don't want to underestimate the commitment that we've given as a council to try and address that, but this is a national problem, and whilst we can continue to try to tackle things locally, as some of the recommendations in this paper attempt to help do, we need national reform, as does every other council providing these services. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. I've not seen more questions, so I shall move to debate. Does anybody have any points they would like to make? Councillor Tong and then Councillor Martin.
I will follow up on some of the points that have just been made. However, I firstly want to thank officers for producing such a really clear report. And I think this report suggests some great recommendations for what we can do to be safe with our finances, because as has been acknowledged, it is a very difficult time for local government at the moment. I was also going to touch on the fact that we have seen this delay to the white paper for SEND services, which I think is immensely disappointing. And now more than ever, I really think it's important to think about our own self-reliance. And I think that's what we're doing, because I don't think we can rely on potential reform as a magic bullet to fix these issues. This is something that I fear that local authorities are going to be left to deal with ourselves, at least for a while. Now, as I mentioned in the Children and Young People Committee, the one concern I have about recommendation D is that this 780k won't be enough. I think it will definitely go a long way, so I'm really happy to support it. But the key problem is it's not going to fully tackle that backlog. And even if we can make optimizations, which I think is an essential step, that backlog is going to continue to exist. And I worry that we're going to need to put more resources into it in order to deal with that problem. Because while that problem remains undealt with, and I think it is unfixable perhaps without further funding, families across Cambridgeshire are really going to suffer. And I've already heard and seen so many instances of children being deprived of their essential right to get a good education, which I just find absolutely heartbreaking. So just wanted to acknowledge, I think there are potential future work that we need to do related to this area. However, I think this is a really substantive plan for next steps. So I'm happy to support all these recommendations here.
Thank you very much. Councillor Martin was next.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just talking about the recommendations and the situation that we're in at the moment. The first meeting that I attended of SRMP, we had the first report, and I mentioned it obviously isn't a good situation to be in, having such a significant overspend projected. But one of the good things that has come from this report is that we are seeing a reduction in that predicted overspend, which is really good to see. And we do need to pass on our thanks to officers for the work that they're doing to ensure that that can happen. Is it far enough? No, because we would always like to be better. We'd always like to get to that zero mark. We want to make sure that we're not overspending anything, but we recognise that in the system with the funding that we currently have, it is very, very difficult to do that. So a big thank you to our officers for the work that they are doing to ensure that the County Council is able to function properly. Obviously, there are services that aren't meeting their statutory responsibilities. We need to recognise that, and this report is trying to move us into a situation that we're able to deliver on those statutory responsibilities. I agree with Councillor Tong that we probably need to throw 10 times, if not 100 times more money into the pot to get the services to where they need to go. But unfortunately, we do not have that money. That money is not in the system. It is not in this council. But what I would like to see is that investment, because essentially it is an investment, that 780,000 into the SEND services, to have some quite clear KPIs that are coming out the back of it. I want to see it coming back to CYP at every committee meeting with an update on how it's progressing. What work is the chairman of the council, of the chairman of that committee doing to ensure that that money is being invested properly, that we are seeing an improvement in that service, because we are rated or ranked very low, unfortunately, on the number of EHCPs that are delivered within the statutory 20-week time frame. We do need to see an improvement for that, because that is the largest amount of emails that I receive is SEND, and EHCPs more particular. You know, I know of cases that have gone well over a year without an EHCP, which is a disaster for us, and we need to take that on board. So I would like to see this investment coming back to us, and us being told exactly how it is being spent, how it is going to improve, and how it is improving. Because what I don't want to see is at the end of the year we've spent another £780,000 in the service, but we've got worse, or we've stayed the same. We need to get improvements from this money. Otherwise, Chair, the recommendations are what they are. As I said, I appreciate that there are pressures within year. There are things that have popped up that we weren't expecting. I agree with what's coming through. It is a bad situation to be in, but this is a good way to try and fix it in the short term. But long term, we do need to have more scrutiny at each of our panels to make sure that the councillors that are chairing each of the committees are being held to account, because part of this falls on them as much as it does fall on officers. So I would like to see bigger debates, better debates in our committees on all sides, to ensure that everyone is being held to account that needs to be held to account, and it's not just being placed off officers' shoulders, because we are elected to make the decisions. We are the ones that are responsible for ensuring that we are delivering. It is officers that are meant to be helping us through that and to leading on a day-to-day basis. So, Chair, happy to support all the recommendations in front of us, with the caveat that I would like to see that SEND investment coming back on a regular basis to the CYP committee, explaining exactly how this is improving the services, and having that debate in that format. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll mirror Councillor Martin's comments. We will also support these recommendations, and obviously with the 12.3 million forecast overspend, I think we must prioritise actions that change the outcomes now. I think D converts the spend in near-term statutory compliance and future cost avoidance, and it's funded from earmarks reserves, and it's not debt or not from debt and tax. So we'll back this. But like Councillor Martin said, I think it needs to come with clear KPIs, and have no baseline creep. Obviously, because I think that gives better outcomes for the children and a better value for the taxpayers. So yeah, we will support also.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other hands. So just before we move to the vote, it is a challenge to reach zero overspend. And frankly, I don't think that is going to be ever possible, given that we are very much an authority, most of whose spending is on services that are led by need, and that we have statutory obligations to support people who have a statutory right to a service, and that demand is unpredictable. It is also growing. I think we are seeing the outfall of the COVID pandemic in view of the rising numbers of children needing high levels of support in school, far beyond what we had before. And we operate in a position of national pressure on funding, national uncertainties, national delays in investment in things like the special schools that have been mentioned. What this council is trying to do is provide much better, and I think we are very much getting there, much better financial information for members, much better risk information and analysis of risk before making high spending decisions. And much better handle on performance, and we'll have the performance report later, which is streets ahead of what we had years ago. So we're moving very much to try to provide the kind of information which all coheres and enables us to make the best decisions and to keep a close eye on what's happening. We're working very hard as members and as officers to try to bring spending within control as much as possible and to reduce that overspend in year as far as we possibly can, bearing in mind, of course, that the government is very likely to make, as it always does, significant announcements in December, early next year, and that can change financial positions very significantly at the very very last minute, so a lot of this is walking through fog, but we are doing the best we can to navigate that path safely. So with those comments, I'm glad to see that there is a measure of agreement around the room likely to happen. So we are being recommended to agree viaments to allocate 10.6 million of corporate pressure funding from corporate items to directorates, as in 3.1.2 of Annex A of the report. Viaments within adults health and commissioning totaling plus or minus 1.2 million as per Annex 3.2.1 of Annex A, a viament of 0.3 million to correct the capital rebaselining viament previously agreed by committee as per 4.5.1 of Annex A, and reserve allocations of 0.78 million for special educational needs and disability performance improvement work as per 5.1 of Annex A. Those are the recommendations. Can I see those in favour, please? And I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, members, and thank you, officers, for your contributions and answers to questions. That was most helpful. The next item is item 5, which is business planning and budget setting 2026-7 to 2028-29. And I'm going to ask the Service Director Policy, Insight, Change and Communication and Service Director Finance and Procurement to do a double act and introduce the report, please. Thank you very much, Joe and Tom.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. So this item is setting out the background to and process for setting the business plan and budget cycle for 26-27 to 28-29. As you'll be aware, each year the Council must set a balanced budget and agree a medium-term business plan that details how the Council will deliver its vision, sustain financial viability, and respond to changes in the operating environment and context of the authority. This year, the business plan will need to be responsive to the emerging evidence, some of which we're seeing later today through this year's Quality of Life survey, as well as up-to-date performance insight from our services. In addition to expected changes to the strategic framework, the emerging budget position, and significant developments around things like local government reorganisation, the Fair Funding Review 2.0, and other major policy changes like the Families First agenda and the 10-year plan for health. Before I hand over to Tom, who will provide a summary of the projected financial position, I'd like to draw members' attention to the proposed process for the business plan and budget setting that is laid out at Part 4, page 98 of your packs. This process details 2 phases of resident and stakeholder involvement. First phase of engagement commencing on the 24th of October, and a second phase of consultation commencing in December. The presentation of a draft business plan and budget will come to December SRMP, and that will allow for policy and service committees to scrutinise the business plan and budget in January, with the final proposal presented at SRMP on the 29th of January for recommendation to full council on the 10th of February. That's all I was going to say by way of an overview of the process. I'll just hand over to Tom now.
Thank you. So the committee has already heard in the previous item the pressures facing the council's budget in the current year. In section 3 of this report, we analyse the continuing implications of those spending commitments into future years alongside our other planning assumptions. At 3.2, we set out that the council can at this stage expect an £18 million increase in its funding next year, which assumes a 2% increase in council tax at this stage, combined with other funding increases, such as growth in the council tax base and business rates growth, which altogether would lead to an overall increase in funding of 3%. However, compared to the position forecasted when full council set the current business plan, we've seen a substantial widening of the budget gap. Section 3.3 sets out how we will need to find budget savings or further additional income of more than 40 million next year. And the graph at 3.4 charts the growth of the Umbridge budget gap over the next 5 years. And ignoring LGR very briefly, to me, more than 136 million over the 5-year gap. Cambridgeshire, as we've already heard, has long called for a fairer funding formula, which in particular recognises area cost and population growth factors in this county, as well as the impacts of children's social care, home to school transport, and adult social care on our budget. And we will need to watch and hope with particular interest the outcome of the fair funding review due in this year's settlement, but cannot at this stage rely on an increase in funding that the county deserves. The committee can see at 3.3 the main summary items explaining the increase in the budget gap, and the chart at 3.6 categorises the build-up of the budget gap. I draw attention in particular to £23 million as the impact of inflation. This follows our well-established methodology of estimating inflation using the most appropriate contractual or economic index for each of the council's main policy areas, as well as demand projections, which also total 23 million, where we focus the impacts of growing population. We forecast the impacts of a growing population and growing need, complexity and acuity. This draws on both forward-looking demography forecasts and trend analysis of services provided by the council. When full council comes to consider the budget in due course, the committee and full council itself will need to formally consider advice on the robustness of estimates and the accuracy of reserves. This has been touched on in the previous item as well, and at 3.7 here we show the current trajectory for usage of reserves. In existing plans, over 35 million of the existing reserves are planned to be deployed up to 2028. So far in these figures, the council has 12 million of savings in future years planned and on track, and good progress is being made in preparation for the December and January committee cycle that Joe has outlined to prepare further proposals and difficult decisions for members as to how the rest of the budget gap will be addressed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Members, any questions for Joe or Tom? Councillor Tong.
Good morning. Firstly, can I say I think you've really hit the nail on the head with the issues we are facing at the moment. As has been discussed today, budgeting is going to be tough, and we need to balance those statutory responsibilities we have and we have to fulfill with all the other great services we offer residents. Now, I think it's especially important we are engaging residents with this process, because I want to make sure residents' taxpayer money is going towards the services that are important to them. And in that regard, I wanted to quickly look to the appendix, the first appendix. Can't remember if there's another one actually. Appendix 1 now, anyway, which is related to the engagement questions. So on page 102 and 103, there is the ability to choose which services you would like to see more money go to or less money go to. Because unfortunately, a key part of democratic engagement isn't just giving people the chance to say what they want money to go to. It's also about having residents accept that responsibility for making key decisions about what cuts that have to be made in this difficult financial climate. And something I wanted to ask about was why the system was chosen of selecting up to 3 boxes instead of, for example, ranking them by priority. Because to me, even if that may be a little bit more complicated and you might have issues with the pragmatics of doing that, so please elaborate, that would give a bit more of a clear indication on what residents value the most. And I think that's what I would like to get from this process, because when it comes to actually setting the budget, I want to make sure we are making the most accurate decisions that are going to be the decisions that residents are happy with.
Councillor Tong, is this a question?
Yeah, the question was related to sorry, did you understand the question? Cool. I think they've understood the question. Thank you.
So in relation to the engagement and consultation process, I think I'd first just say that this is an ongoing process. So as we'll see from the Quality of Life survey, that's another element of the ongoing conversation, dialogue that we have with residents and stakeholders. So we build a picture up over the course of any given year about what the priorities of residents and stakeholders are. So the first phase of the engagement is designed to generate general input around the areas of focus that residents and stakeholders might like to see. The second phase of the work outlined in the paper is the formal consultation that we are duty bound to undertake, that will go into the specifics of budget proposals after they've been presented to committee in December. Within that, the decision to provide an option to select up to 3, I think, is partly a practical one around the time in which we have to turn around the analysis and feed that back into the decision-making process of committee.
Thank you. Yes, you're very fortunate, Councillor Tong, that a discussion of the quality of life survey will immediately follow this this item. So are there any other questions for officers? No questions I can see. Move to the debate then. Anybody wish to say anything? Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. Happy again to support what's in front of us. A lot of it is just a process that we've always followed, and I think we should continue to follow just for the consistency. The one part that I would like to raise, though, Chair, and would appreciate your reflections on, is reading through the survey that's going out to residents. What benefit are we gaining from that? How is that going to be able to influence your decision and the leader's decision when it comes to setting your business plan and setting your budget? Because, for example, it splits it down into directorate rather than committee. Now, for example, I have residents that would much rather spend more money in highways, but remove money from green infrastructure or green investments, for example. I can feel Councillor Tong staring at me at the moment saying that. But I have many residents who think that, but obviously on the form that's in front of us, it allows you to say we want to increase on both or reduce both. There is a comment section, but it requires someone to then want to spend a bit of extra time to do that. So I was wondering whether there's an opportunity to not only have the directorate, but also have the committees, because then someone could say, well, we'd happily spend more money in highways and infrastructure, but we want to remove money from the Green Investment Committee. I don't know if that's something that we can integrate into this, because then I feel there's going to be a better outcome, and then something for you and Councillor Netzinger to use when it comes to setting your priorities.
Thank you very much for that question. It is very difficult in a survey of this type to enable people to say exactly what they would want to say, given the limitations of a survey of this type. I mean, I have seen other surveys of from this council on this sort of issue in previous years, which I would not have wanted to put out to the public, but had to, sit by and see happen. And I think with this one, your question of what will you do with the information, how will it be useful to you in making a decision, was exactly what I asked officers in the early development of this. So I'm glad we are on the same wavelength as in wanting this to be useful and informative alongside the quality of life survey, which is an incredibly rich source of information. And I'm really pleased that we now have 3 years worth of data on that to also consider. To do the kind of task you're asking for is incredibly complex and expensive and time consuming. And there have been methodologies around that for years. I remember 30 years ago as a councillor being in opposition on a council that was using simultaneous multi-attribute trade-off techniques with residents. Fascinating, but quite labour intensive, asking people to make exactly the kind of trade-offs that we are having to make. If you want to spend more overall, what are you going to cut? If you're going to cut this, what does that mean? None of this is easy. I think this is a reasonable stab at getting some sense of the public view in addition to the data we already have. I'm not saying it's perfect, and the perfect would take far more time and money at the moment than what we have available to us at the moment. But I'm confident that it enables people to say a lot. And there is always, I think, the opportunity for write-in, which is always useful as well. There is more to say. This, I think, is a reasonable start, and I'm sure it will provide us with information that is useful to us when it comes to making the decisions that we will have to make. I hope that is helpful. Did you have a follow-up?
I do, thank you, Chair. All I was simply asking for was a couple of additional options available, not an additional, not spending more time, not asking for loads and loads of questions, asking people, would you rather spend here or there? And if you spend here, how are you going to remove money elsewhere? It's simply breaking up some of the directorates a bit further, splitting them up, because as I said, Frank's directorate is huge in scale and has many different facets within it. As I said, using the example I use, there are many people out there would much rather spend more money on highways and to remove from green infrastructure, but they can't put that forward in this survey because they're all encompassed under one directorate. So it's just adding a breakdown of the directorate's responsibility, or some of the directorate's responsibilities, or splitting it into committees instead of directorates.
Thank you. I'm very reluctant to get involved in rewriting a questionnaire by committee, but I hear the point you're making. Councillor Hathorn, I saw, no, sorry, it was Councillor Ioannidis I saw next, and then Councillor Hathorn, and then Councillor Meschini, and then Councillor Tong. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, Chair, I'm going to have to disagree with your sentiment that it'd be too expensive. I mean, I agree with Councillor Martin that I don't think it's a difficult task. It's a case of, and I think Councillor Tong's point on listed in order of priority would work to some extent to at least get an idea on the residents' priorities, which would feed into Councillor Martin's point. I don't think that's difficult to do. I don't think that would be expensive to do. And it would definitely give us a much more clear indication as to how we are to set out our budgets according to the residents' needs, because that's what we're here and we're elected for, is to represent our residents. So unless we can, identify what their needs are and what their priorities are, we will not be able to represent them correctly and as they would want us to do. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to disagree. I think this does need to be looked at. I think it does need to be edited so that we can get this information from this survey, because I don't think it's a difficult task. Thank you.
Right, before I bring Sue Grace in, I am going to point out that recommendation C before us is to delegate any amendments to the executive director, executive directors in consultation with chair and vice chair. So there is that. Sue.
Yes. Thank you. And just to say, when you hear the results of the quality of life survey, then certainly in terms of understanding needs and priorities and concerns about living in Cambridgeshire, that comes through that. So it's how that is overlaid with this information. But also I want to draw your attention to the second phase of consultation, where we will have the proposals as part of the draft budget, where you will get the detail of what we're proposing to deliver and to do in order to close the gap that Tom identified. And on those detailed proposals, there'll be a further phase of consultation with members of the public. So it is that further detail will come in the second phase. And so I hope that gives you some reassurance that this is not the only engagement that we have. We've got 3 sections of engagement, and the detail will come in relation to the draft budget, which you'll be seeing in December.
Thank you. On that point then, what is the turnout of that consultation? Because from my experience with speaking to residents, they don't really want to be involved in politics. They want things to work within their communities. They don't want to be involved in politics. So what kind of engagement is it? Is there more of an engagement in the quality of life survey or these consultations? Because if it's the quality of life survey, then we'd be better opposed to get further information from that than in the consultations. Does that make sense? Thank you.
I think it's all of those things connected together, and the quality of the life survey is the most comprehensive survey that we carry out. And when Rachel presents this to you, I'm sure she'll be able to cover the way, because of the investment that is made in that survey from a range of partners, including ourselves, then the way that is a statistically robust survey where we can have confidence that what we're hearing through that survey is representative. These surveys we do around the budget, we have to do within a very tight time scale, and we have to do and it has to follow the discussions in this committee as the budget develops. And so those tend to be online, and then some direct engagement with key stakeholders, key community groups, community leaders to amplify what we do online, and then our campaigns, promotional campaigns around that off the back of the committee both today and in December. So I hope that paints a picture of how we engage across all those pieces of work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hathorn was next.
Very briefly, if we look at green investment, the green investment area of the council, that is largely revenue generating energy schemes which were originally conceived under a Conservative administration. So actually, I think they would be popular with the residents of Cambridgeshire as they help to keep council tax bills low. Flood mitigation, I cannot see any community that is exposed to flooding issues suggesting that would be a good thing to cut. And there is a tiny spend on nature. There are many, many other vital services, but it is very, very easy to flag the term green investment as some type of unnecessary frivolity, but the reality in Cambridgeshire is quite different.
Thank you, Councillor Hathorn. Councillor Meschini was next.
Thank you, Chair. And I completely appreciate that it's difficult to see everyone, but I had a point I wanted to make almost before Councillor Martin spoke, which I think you will find interesting. This paper in front of us is relatively standard. We sat here in this room on Halloween 2024 with pretty much the exact same thing in front of us. And I have here the business plan consultation that we passed at that meeting. And I rather think that that is probably much more similar to what Councillor Martin and Councillor Ioannidis want, because what I found interesting from this year's survey is that I like straight and to the point. This is where we spend our money. Do you agree with possibly raising some more through tax or charges? This is where we spend our money. Tell us what you would cut if you didn't want to raise taxes or charges. This is what we've got now. What we had in the 24 review, which we don't have here, is a preamble, but not by directorate, but by ambition. So there was the green, the caring, and the fair, there you go. And it had a few things under each which people were asked to rank in order. And that I thought was relatively useful, and it sets the scene for some of the things that then people are asked to say, do you want to raise tax or do you want to cut? I will just humbly suggest that if it's not too difficult, maybe we could look at have some of these things again. If not, fair enough. I'm not doing this anymore myself particularly, but I do think that when you work on consultations, it's useful to set the scene sometimes. So that's all I'll say.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tong.
Hello, I will quickly respond to Councillor Martin's point about how further consultation could be done specifically via breaking down the directorates, because I actually think that's a really good idea. Of course, I hope, and I don't think residents would necessarily want to cut green investment. I think there's a lot of benefits to green investment, but the key thing is I want that feedback. I want to know what residents think, even if it's something I disagree with. I will approve these plans. I think they are really good because it's been acknowledged that this is just a first step towards further engagement. And I think this is a good first step, so I think it should be supported. However, I definitely think trying to, in future, break down via directorate more, break down each directorate to focus more on the specifics could be very valuable. Now, the quality of life survey has been mentioned, and I think that provides a lot of useful information. I think that is very important, and I don't want to try and act like that's just be totally ignored. However, I think the information provided by this sort of engagement is very different, because that's getting people's views, but this is far more prescriptive. It's about getting a mandate from residents, getting them to engage with the budgeting process and think critically, because democratic engagement is a form of empowerment. It's about giving people the responsibility to think about how they want the future to be. So we can't just rely on the quality of life survey. We have to think about it in terms of budget, and I think that's the best way to frame this engagement, by thinking, we know the issues you're facing, but we want to give you the chance to feed back into how those issues should be solved. Just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more hands. So just in conclusion, you have heard that we have 3 years worth of building quality of life survey data, which we can turn to help us in our decision making. We have here the first stage in a series of consultation exercises with residents and with stakeholders about the decisions that we're about to make as well. This is a council which really wants to listen to and understand the views and priorities of residents. That's something that we have worked very hard to improve in the last few years, and something that I think really is bearing fruit and is valuable to do. I'm pleased to see this in front of us. As I said before, the recommendation C does enable us to make any amendments before this goes out, and also to bear in mind feedback before we go to further stages. So I'm confident and comfortable that this is one part of a valid and very important process before we move to some very important decisions early next year. With that in mind, just to remind us that we're being asked to approve the process and the timelines for setting the business plan and budget 26/7 and 28/9 to 28/9, to approve the plans for engagement and consultation with residents and key stakeholders, and to delegate any amendments requested by the committee to the Executive Director of Finance and Resources and the Executive Director of Strategy and Partnerships in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee. So can I see those in favour of that, please? Thank you very much. I think that is unanimous again. Thank you. The time now is 11:20. So we move on to item 6, which is the quality of life survey, which has been extensively trailed for the last hour and 20 minutes. So Rachel Hallam is our Head of Service Policy, Performance and Intelligence, and will introduce this very bigged up report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. The Quality of Life Survey continues to provide valuable insight into the experiences of residents across Cambridgeshire as part of the Council's commitment to be an evidence-led organisation. The paper today provides contextual evidence in the form of the key findings from the 2025 survey for the committee to consider in the context of the business plan and budget approach for 26-27. As a reminder, this is the third year of the survey run by independent consultants, Think Insights, and this year we were again partnered by the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, South Cambridgeshire District Council and Cambridge Ahead. The survey, which is mainly a quantitative survey, ran from May to July this year and reached over 6,000 residents in total. The key findings included in section 3 today provide the results of our main stratified sample survey of 5,001 residents. This approach ensures that the survey reached 1,100 residents in each district and that those residents surveyed were representative of the resident population in each area, and that's based on the most recent census data. As the paper highlights, most Cambridgeshire residents continue to feel happy and safe in the county. However, as you will see, the findings also highlight this is not the case for all of our residents, with concerns around road and pavement maintenance, cost of living pressures, mental health and loneliness, and in particular there amongst our younger residents coming through in the results. As well as providing important contextual information to support the shaping of business planning decisions, the information has and will continue to also provide intelligence for council services in their planning and will provide further evidence as part of the planned review of the strategic framework. Today, the committee is asked to note the key findings and consider the implications. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. So, members, any questions on this report? Councillor Wyatt, Councillor Martin, Councillor Ioannidis.
Thanks. I'll kick off. I think it's really great that we're doing this, and I'm, as a data scientist, I'm very happy to see more and more data that we can get that we can then use for practical purposes. And it's also very encouraging that a lot of people are happy and feel connected to their communities. I wonder, though, if we've done any further examination of the results to see if there are any correlations between people who answer certain ways and their life experiences. Do we have more information on, say, of the people who don't feel connected to their community, are they also more likely to feel unhappy, or are they also more likely to feel financial pressures or mental health pressures? Do we know what the trends are that go one level deeper than that? And if not, can we look at examining that, please?
Thank you. And a very good question, as a can relate, really wealth of information for us to go to. We've only actually had the findings about 5-6 weeks now, but so this is just the key findings. But as we've done in previous years, completely plan now to go through and delve deeper into those around some of those key findings that are coming through. We have all of the data by a lot of demographics of the residents. So we'll start to look not only at whether there are particular residents and findings coming through, but also start, as you mentioned, to compare and responses to some questions with some other questions as well.
Thank you. Yes, there's lots more to come out of this. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Really just echoing what Councillor Wyatt said, it'll be useful. It'll be good. It'll be really interesting to know how we then delve deep and look at the patterns that come out. So you said if people don't feel connected to their community, do they then feel less happy? Those are the sort of correlations that I would quite like to see, and it sounds like that's going to come out. The second point that I was going to raise was around how are we tracking how people access this survey in the first place? Are they seeing it on social media? Is it because of the direct comms that we've done, that it goes into newsletters? Because the one stat that jumped out to me is that half of residents feel CCC keep them well informed. To some extent, I'd expect it to be higher than that, because the people that have probably seen this survey in the first place are the people that are following us on social media, as in the council, or they're reading their local newsletters, or they're following county councillors' Facebook pages that have then shared this survey. So for me, that was quite a surprising stat to come out there. So are we tracking how people are seeing the survey in the first place and then engaging? Because it's just a bit of an anomaly as far as I'm concerned.
To point out before Rachel comes in that 2.3 notes that the survey reaches 5,501 residents each year and is designed with a stratified sampling approach to ensure the results are representative of the residents' population. So that representative nature of the response is absolutely built in. Rachel, did you want, or Joe, did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to clarify, there's 3 elements to the survey. So the first is the stratified sample that is done by the independent consultants. That is a mixture through both web and telephone calls. So that's how they specifically find out about the survey. When we run the general survey, that is through our social media channels, and we do follow the web statistics. I don't have them with me today for that particular purpose, but that is analysed separately to the results you're seeing today. And then there is that third element, which is our hard to reach residents, and that they are targeted through some of our work with colleagues in the community services and wider partnerships as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Ioannidis was next.
I think my question's pretty much been answered. So, but I don't know if my follow-on could be answered in regards to the reports on higher loneliness with the younger cohorts. I'd just like to know what we would do for low-cost intervention in regard to this, that we could deploy via maybe libraries or the voluntary sector to reach obviously under 25s, and if we do that, how we would measure the impact.
Sue Grace.
Thank you very much. And coincidentally, we do have a project precisely doing that in our library service. We gained some external funding for it from the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, and it's specifically about engaging with young people, and also the way they work in a really specific way is we are trying to track young people perhaps who spend a lot of time at home and shut away in their rooms, and trying to attract them with different sort of initiatives and programs of work that will draw them out to start to enable them to socialise. So because that is grant funded through the Department of Culture, media and sport, then we are looking at how that can be evaluated. So it's in a very specific location. My memory is failing as to exactly where it is started. I think it started in Finland, and then is looking at other parts of in March in Finland, and then is looking at other parts of Finland to be explored further. But I can follow that up with the library service and provide you with some information on that. But we really are looking forward to that evaluation. Thank you.
Bring in the Chief Executive at this
Thank you.
point as well.
Chair, thank you. And perhaps just to build on some of the comments from Sue, to remind members that, of course, this council was a national award winner from the Local Government Chronicle for its work in respect of community engagement, particularly within Fenland, and that was with young people. So the work of the Fenland Youth Tribe, that's actually primarily been focused on Wisbech most recently. In fact, I'm with the community service next week. I'm actually visiting some of the project and meeting with some of the young people next week. But it was important to emphasise the point that this council has and continues to take active measures to try and encourage youth engagement, youth involvement and participation, despite the fact that youth services have been substantially reduced in funding for considerable periods of time. And obviously the prevalence of the issues that Councillor Ioannidis outlined in terms of isolation and impact on mental well-being have been made worse by the pandemic, not better. So I think it's fair to say we take as much action as we can, but what's really good to see is the work of our community service alongside libraries and skills is paying dividends and is getting national recognition for how good that is. So thank you for the opportunity to share that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hathorn.
Thank you. So it is a really important survey, and I suspect it informs the council throughout its operations, and officers look to this survey to understand how the impact they're having. I think I do struggle with some of the process. I struggle with the fact that I can't see the survey questions. So I see the answers presented, but I don't see how the question was framed or in what context the whole survey was. And I go around and I can't find it anywhere. And I think it would be it just helps reassure people who are that it is sort of valid. I also know enough about statistics. I don't know very much, but I know there are confidence in intervals and statistically significant numbers. And I don't know when we see single percentage increases, whether it is statistically significant for that sample size. And I think it would be really helpful if we could consider just those bits of reassurance around the framing of the survey moving forwards. I think there are questions here, so can we see the survey questions? Can we look at some confidence intervals around the numbers? And can we understand when the County Council's performance is compared to national trends, whether the same question is being asked in different places and whether the sort of scale of response is the same in different places? Because we might be looking good nationally, but if the way in which the evidence is collected is completely different in different places, then it's not really a very helpful statistic. So yes, that would be helpful.
Thank you. Three very good questions, and each of those are answered in the fuller pack that's available on the website. So each of the results that are presented then has the question at the bottom, but I take the point around the questions perhaps being presented all together. Similarly, that significance of the results, but if that's not being coming through clearly, again, we can take that away and have a look at that. And where we compare, we do our best. So where we use the Local Government Association questions, we do our best to mirror those. We've actually chosen locally, in some cases, to make that question where it's presented nationally more relevant, to our residents. And again, we use the sort of description in the footnotes of the main survey on the website to explain some of that. But if that's not coming through clearly, I can take that away and make sure we.
Could I follow up? But I did read the bigger pack, and now that you've said it, I can see that question, but I was searching for those questions everywhere and couldn't see them anywhere.
Thanks very much. I don't think there are any more questions. Is there any debate to be had on this? Councillor Galbraith.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed from this section there's a great deal of patting on the head as to how we've improved
and satisfaction rates such as libraries at 89%, registration 87%, waste 82%. But then we drop down a little bit to only 50% of local residents' concerns are addressed. What I find a little bit is that tucked down right at the bottom of all these wonderful statistics we're being given as how well the council has done, even though there's a slight improvement, the elephant in the room is the roads, pavements, whatever you want to call it, at 29%. Now, I know from my own experience as a new councillor, but already I would say that probably between 80 and 85% of all emails I receive are from residents who have got concerns about maintenance. So it's all very well talking. I understand other things are important, but mental health and so on, I understand that. But the residents I talk to, and in my area particularly, is the dreadful state of the maintenance of our roads and pavements. Now, 29% is not good. That means that you've got a huge number of people very dissatisfied with the council's performance. And most of the people I talk to, that's the only thing they want to talk about. Now, so what are we going to do? Or it is a question, but it's not a question, it's a rhetorical question. What are the council going to do about redirecting capital and maintenance effort accordingly? We need to fix the basics. It's all very grand of what we're talking about. We're not fixing the basics in this council. Are we going to do that? As I say, it's a rhetorical question. Thank you.
Thank you. And the rhetorical answer is that the point of the metaphor about the elephant in the room is that it's something that you see but don't talk about. This report precisely does talk about it, and the satisfaction levels are improved. They're not enough. We all agree they're not enough. We are starting from decades of neglect, and the Highways and Transport Committee is working extremely hard to make the best use of capital and revenue opportunities to improve the highways. And residents, I think, are beginning to respond accordingly, although we are well aware of the huge gap between the resources available to us and the state of the roads over many years that needs to be addressed. And I don't think anybody is more aware of that than I am, living where I do in the particular location where I am. Councillor Wyatt was next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware that that question was intended to be rhetorical, but if I may answer it as this is a debate. I appreciate that a lot of your emails are about highways issues, and you may feel like it is more than 80%, and it may very well be, but if I may, the plural of anecdote is not data, and what we have from you is an anecdote, and what we have here is actual data. So what I won't deny is that 29% of people being happy with their roads is frankly not good enough. We do need to do better, but at the same time, what we can acknowledge is that over the last couple of years, the previous administration and this one have been investing at least £20 million more a year, which has almost doubled the highways budget compared to the administration that preceded that one. And we have seen an increase in satisfaction. I think, if anything, this is evidence that the plan we are working on is working. It's not going to happen overnight unless you know quite a large number of highways people who can come and repair every road at once. We aren't going to get a transformation from 29% to 100% within the next year, possibly within the next 5 or 10. But what must be acknowledged is that the thing that we are doing is improving the highways. We've increased investment. This is evidence that that increasement of investment is working, and therefore we should continue it. The point of this survey is to engage the public to see what we should do with our money. We have done that, and it is working. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wyatt. And if you would address remarks through the chair, that's the correct way of doing
My
things.
apologies.
Sorry, my apologies also to Councillor Tong. I think you were next in the queue and I didn't give you the opportunity. My sincere apologies.
Don't worry at all. Was it Councillor Machini first? Do you want to go? Oh.
No, I've called you. You were second in the queue.
Oh, well, firstly, I want to say there's great stuff here. I think the information is incredibly useful, and there's definitely stuff we can take inspiration from here. However, as I've already said, I think we need to be very careful not to think this data in itself allows us to set the budget, because even though we can see the problems that residents are having, we don't necessarily know what their priorities are. And I think that's where this extra engagement can really refine the information we have at the moment. I also want to just acknowledge one point. This is a slightly pedantic thing, but towards the end, in the conclusion, the report says residents' views on Cambridgeshire County Council performance are the most positive since tracking began, suggesting improved experiences. And I don't think in itself this statement is wrong. However, I think it is really important we acknowledge that tracking this data has only started a few years ago. So that's quite a limited pool to draw from. And I don't think we can necessarily conclude there is some vast improvement, because for all intents and purposes, I think most people acknowledge the last few years have been pretty bad. So it's not like this is providing a great benchmark to work from. However, again, I'm really excited to see what we can do to try and tackle some of these issues that residents are having. To quickly respond to Councillor Galbraith's points, I think there is a lot that can be done to tackle the issue with roads and pavements around Cambridge and Cambridgeshire. I think there's huge issues. No one would deny there's issues. And that's what, by budget setting, is important, because it allows members to put forward innovative proposals to try and tackle some of these problems. So if Councillor Galbraith, if Councillor Galbraith has any really clever ideas to try and fix this issue, I'd be really excited to see them when they come to committees, so that we can scrutinise them and potentially support them when that happens, if that happens.
Thank you very much. Councillor Meschini.
Thank you very much, Chair. Really very briefly, I mean, this survey ran from May, so you will excuse me if I take a little bit of pride and a little bit of credit, because a lot of, the small but significant improvements that we are seeing hopefully reflect on some of the decisions that I made as well. And I wish you well in carrying that forward and improving on the curve in the next few years. And it is my intense hope that there will be a quality of life survey every year in the foreseeable future, because I think these are very, very useful. The narrative is great. These reports have always been excellent quality. They continue to be. I'm very, very glad. We choose to present things in the way that we think is the most useful for us. One of the things that I would like to encourage the administration to think about is, obviously, we aren't seeing, and we weren't going to see, a significant improvement in the Let's forget the roads for a moment, because I think, if there is one person to turn off the lights at the end, it'll be that. I mean, the day that there is an 80% satisfaction in that is the day we all go home and we don't need a county councillor anymore. But obviously, there are things underlying the front of the data that's in front of us, which I think is really important. And some of it isn't in here, because we're being very good at only asking about things that we're directly responsible for. So one of the things that has always been at the forefront of my mind is the link between isolation, anxiety, and mental health issues in young people and transport opportunities for them. And a lot of the things that are being done and sometimes undone in that department aren't being done by us. So I would like some focus in the kind of things that we can do to try and ensure that we don't forget about this, because I do think that I do think that you're going to need, and perhaps green investment might be the key, I don't know, but you do need to put the safety net under these young people, because, if they can't get out of their house and see their friends, they're going to continue to feel the way they do.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Meschini. I'm seeing no more hands, so I will move to the recommendation, which is simply to note the key findings from the Quality of Life Survey 2025 and consider the implications of these findings for the Council's business plan and budget setting process. I think we have all done that. Do you want a show of hands on a note? I don't think so. So thank you very much indeed, everyone, for your contributions to that. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Joe. Joe remains with us for the next item, which is the change portfolio update. I am aware that I'm obliged to call a break at, or as close to as possible, 12 noon after we've been going 2 hours. We are substantially behind where we had hoped to be at this point time-wise. So I'm hoping that we can make up time as we go, but I'm aiming to get this one under the wire before we go for our 10-minute break. So, Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try my best. This paper provides an overview of the Council's portfolio of change programmes and projects as of August of this year. This is the first time that the overview report has been provided to committee and is part of our process of embedding the project management framework that was agreed last year by this committee. This report is presented at the same meeting as alongside the IFMR that we've already covered, risk and the performance report that are later on the agenda. And that's designed to provide members with a holistic view of key elements of organisational health and performance. The portfolio delivery structure that's set out at 2.5, page 1112 of the report, flows from the Our Future Council change strategy that was agreed by this committee in October of last year. The portfolio approach has enabled a more robust and comprehensive approach to change delivery, with specific benefits of this set out at 2.2 in the report, which is again page 112. I think a core component of the portfolio report that it's worth mentioning is much clearer governance that's provided by the introduction of senior responsible officer roles, the change board that's chaired by the chief executive, and the biannual overview update to this committee, of which this report is the first. As we've been embedding this new approach, we've been constantly seeking opportunities to validate and test ourselves. And we recently participated in a free benchmarking exercise via the consultancy firm Human Engine. This provided some really useful insights about our approach and some considerations for further refinement. And those are set out at 3.6. In terms of the report, the portfolio report update itself, that's provided in the appendix. Members will note that there are currently 10 programmes and 16 projects across the Future Council portfolio and the Major Change portfolio. 5 of these are currently RAG rated red, 4 rated amber and 15 green. A further 2 are rated blue, which is the designation given to programmes and projects that have been formally closed following the Change Board's approval of a closure report for those particular pieces of work. The breakdown of the RAG ratings is provided at page 120, with summary commentary of red and amber rated programmes and projects detailed on page 121 and 122. And that's everything I was going to say by way of an introduction and overview.
Thank you very much indeed, Joe. Commendably wonderful summary. Chief Executive, would you like to comment before we move to questions?
Thank you, Chair. Equally not feeling the pressure and trying to be brief. I just wanted to say I'm sorry that Councillor Goldsack is not with us today, because he in particular has been actively interested in understanding how the Council approaches programme and project management and how we understand the risks at an organisational level in this space. So I'm sure we will make sure that's followed up with him particularly. I did, Chair, just want to emphasise that this is, as Joe's outlined, part of providing greater assurance and oversight for members, but also greater public transparency over how we are managing large-scale change, whether that's got financial benefit, savings attached to it, or broader organisational changes. This is a methodology that I may have brought with me from another place, but it's definitely part of what can best be described as improved governance, improved control, and improved accountability. And I'm sure the executive directors in attendance will definitely say that the Change Board meeting is very much about driving accountability and ownership, both for them personally, but for the people reporting to them that are leading on projects. So I think this is part of what can best be described as better governance, better grip, and better delivery focus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, members? Councillor Meschini and then Councillor Ioannidis.
Very quickly, I'm not proposing to talk a lot about SEND and children's services because we kind of have a little bit, but I wanted to ask a question specifically about the Waste PFI red indicator, because the red indicator essentially means the objective is not, it says on the paper that the red indicator means the objective is not achievable. And then the paper further says we've rated this as red because in case the strategy fails. I'm a little worried about that, and I don't want to talk in detail about the plan that we have, but we do have one. And I was wondering whether we want to expand a little bit more on, from ourselves, an organizational perspective, what we are doing to manage that red rating, because either our assessment is wrong or pessimistic. Because essentially what I'm reading from the rating it has been assigned is that we're not on track to meet it, we're not going to meet it, we're going to go down as an authority because of this. So maybe in the future we want to describe it differently. I don't know.
Thank you. Frank Jordan has settled himself in the hot seat. So, Frank.
Thank you, Councillor Machini, and thank you, Chair. So the reason why it's rated red is because of the impact of not being able to deliver the solution to the review that we're undertaking. I won't be able to go into too much detail because obviously it relates to a PFI contract, therefore it relates to a very significant contract, therefore it's commercial in nature. But to give assurance, we've got a very clear programme in place. It is well resourced, it is well governed, and we have a strategy in place. The reason why it's red is to be able to move it forward. We are waiting for a significant third party to be able to give some clarification on being able to move this forward. Once we've got that, we think we'll be able to make a clear recommendation to members around the solution, and that's planned to take place currently by the end of this calendar year. So that's the current position. So it's the reason why it's rated red is because we are waiting for another party to give us some clarification, and if we are able to move forward, clearly it would have a significant impact on the council. So that's the reason for rating it in that way.
Thank you. I think that's very much a description issue, isn't it? Any other questions? Sorry. Oh, Councillor Ioannidis was next. I do beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's actually the first part of my question answered. I have a second question in regard to the adults in-house review. The savings are unlikely for 25-26. So I want to know what the contingency is to protect the 25-26 bottom line, and which grants could be used as a stopgap, and for how long. Thank you.
Patrick, over to you.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So the this year's funding from the grants has been specific monies that we received both through the MSIF grant and through some other specific grants that we got from government that were able to support the operations of our business. So it was use of the monies that we could have applied elsewhere within the budget, but we've chosen to use it against this because of the challenges that we've had around the delivery against that. We're working up detailed proposals on how we can deliver that in the full year in 26-27. So the use of the grants is a one-off to just offset the cost pressures that we're seeing on the non-delivery of that budget in 25-26.
Thank you. Sorry, just to clarify, the use of the grants was a one-off.
Yeah, the use of the grants is a one-off to enable us to bring our overspend down to closer to a break-even position. 26-27, there will be full implementation against that area of spend, so we won't need the grant monies in 26-27, sorry. But we haven't yet got confirmation that the grant monies will be available in 26-27 because of the changes in the government grant anyway. So it was grants that we'd received and we held in our reserves for this year that we've used as a one-off.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. And again, thank you for the report. This is very well set out and easy for us to interpret. And again, it's disappointing Councillor Goldsack isn't here because I know this is something that he takes a very keen interest in. I want to just pick up on the jumps in the scales. So, for example, fostering services has gone from red to green in a month. But the one that stands out even more is learning disability partnership reconfiguration has gone from red to blue. I can understand such a big jump if we're looking at quarterly timescales or 6 monthly timescales or even a year timescales. But within a month tends to mean that there's been a significant change in a very, very, very short period of time to move it from, yes, we're doing okay, we're on track, to no, we are massively behind and this is a huge issue. Can you just explain, because what we've got in front of us doesn't really explain what those changes were and why they were so significant that it's meant from a green to a red or from a red to a blue?
So thank you for the question. Patrick may want to come in on some of the detail. I think it's just worth noting that the blue designation simply reflects formal closure of a project or program. So it's not a commentary on success or otherwise. And really, what that is about is, for example, it might be that there is work that no longer requires a distinctive project and program structure around it because it can transition to BAU, and therefore a closure report follows. And that means that the specific project or program that has been set up is closed, but the work around it may be continuing through business as usual. I mean, Patrick can pick up on the specifics of it.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Yeah, so this is a piece of work associated with the decoupling of a long partnership arrangement that we'd had with the ICB and Cambridge and Peterborough Foundation Trust, or CPFT. We decoupled from that from the end of March this financial year. So there was a programme of work to deal with the decoupling. The legacy of that work continues, but it's built into our business as usual. So our teams are still now working through cases. We're still working with the ICB, we're working with CPFT to support the people who receive those services most effectively. But the decoupling and the arrangements and the work around the separation of that partnership agreement was part of that programme. So that's concluded, but then the work continues as part of our BAU. So there's no additional requirement for additional capacity from a programme resource to help us with that project.
Thank you, Chair. And just to clarify, and through you, so when there's a blue rating, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was a successful end to the project. It could mean that it was that we've tried everything we can and it's just not possible what we were looking to do, and therefore we've closed it. Is that correct? Is my understanding correct?
Thank you. And Chair, yes, the blue rating is simply that a gateway has been passed, which is the formal closure report has been taken to change board and approved. That's all that it reflects.
Just following on from that then, Chair, I think it'd be useful for us to then receive within this report or in some other form, whether it's a positive blue, i.e. we've got to the end and we've been successful, or it's we've got to a closed report because we've met a time frame but it wasn't quite what we wanted, or that we have outright not been able to deliver and therefore it's closed. I think it'd be useful to get that level of detail here.
Chief Executive itching to get in here.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Martin for the question, or the comment, I should say. I think that's a very helpful observation. That's something officers will take away and consider for the next iteration of this report. I also think that the definition of project or programme closure being either on time or on budget is partly important. Actually, the bit that this report doesn't draw out yet is that every project closure report also requires benefit realisation to be looked at. So we do actually track what has the programme or project achieved. And of course, in some cases, for example, where that might have been as a result of a commercial matter or a legal dispute, which we highlighted, for example, earlier on the Learning Disability Partnership with the NHS, sometimes that movement can be rapid where legal matters are brought to a conclusion. But I think the point is well made. Happy to look at that for the next version of this report. Thank you.
Yeah, I've already raised that with Joe outside the meeting, as Joe knows, and I think this is also a definition confusion issue and a colour confusion issue, because on the financial reports, the savings reports that we see, blue indicates succeeded beyond our wildest expectations, and it was introduced by a Conservative administration who wanted the colour blue to indicate absolutely exorbitant success, which is why they chose that. That's what that means in the savings report. It isn't what it means in this report, and people are at risk of carrying over that expectation, and I think we do need to be clearer about what project programme has formally closed actually means, and to put some more information around that. So yes indeed. I'm not seeing any more questions. Oh, sorry, Councillor Wyatt.
No worries. I just have a very quick one. The report sort of summary part with all of the reds and greens has 4 things that are amber, but the table at the very end only describes 3 of them. One of them is education staffing and non-staffing, which is listed as amber for both last month, for July and August, but isn't discussed in the table. Can I get a little bit more information on that, please?
So I think that the mismatch between the amber ratings is that in the table and the overview is that there has been a change that in September that was picked up in the overview that has been reported in the table, but the graphic where you've got them stacked is from August. So we picked that up but we picked it up too late. So we're going to have to clarify that and make sure the reporting timelines stack up before it comes back to the next committee. In terms of the specific, I'll hand over to Martin.
Okay, thank you, Martin.
Yep, fine. So yeah, the delay in there is due to the service redesign, which is underway at the moment, scoping that out. Some of that redesign is going to be directed specifically at looking at our send delivery. So the investment that was agreed today will need to be complemented by a more robust process and an increase in staffing. So the redesign of how we deliver our services internally will improve performance, but it will also need to be redesigned in the sense that we will need to move staff from one place to another and improve our systems. Some of that was related to initially a savings project, but some of that will now need to be reinvested, and some of it is due to a delay in that piece of work. So delays to the piece of work and a slight change to the process.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Is there any debate to be had on this before we move to the vote? Councillor Young.
I'd just make a very brief comment that I find this report admirably transparent, and I found it very interesting to read. Thank you.
Thank you. Kind of comment I like. So with that, then we have been asked to review and scrutinise the status of the Council's change portfolio of significant programmes and projects. Do we feel that we have reviewed and scrutinised? Yeah. Okay. Anybody feel we haven't reviewed and scrutinised? No. Good. Thank you very much indeed. It's now 12 o'clock on the nail, so I'm going to request that we have an 11-minute break, and we're back at 12:11, please. Thank you. Members, it's now 12:11 and the meeting is resuming. So I will ask members to turn to page 125 in their homework books, and we have the customer feedback policy and care standards, which Sue Grace will introduce for us.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. The background to this report is that the local government and Ombudsman introduced a revised complaint handling code in 2024, which councils are expected to adopt as best practice by April 2026. The code applies to our non-statutory complaints as opposed to the statutory processes that are set out in legislation for adults and children's social care complaints. So this report sets out the work that we've carried out to implement the changes in accordance with this revised code, and the opportunity that we've taken to look across all aspects of customer feedback. And just for clarification, the types of feedback that I mean by that are set out in paragraph 3.1 of the cover report. Just thought it would be helpful to summarise the key changes and improvements we've made as a result of this work. Firstly, as required by the code, we will be moving from a 3-stage complaints process to a 2-stage process in accordance with the code, and this change will be going live on the 12th of January 2026. We've also developed a new IT system to support our handling of all types of customer feedback. This will enable us to report much more effectively on our performance, both across our statutory and our non-statutory complaints and our other types of feedback. This reporting over time will be fed into our existing performance reporting, which is an item that's still to come up on today's agenda. And so that will include lessons learned. And we will have detail around that performance, which will be conveyed to all the relevant policy and service committees, with the overview of performance coming to this committee. We've clarified roles and responsibilities through this work, and the summary of that is set out in this particular cover report, both for senior officers under section 1.3 and for elected politicians at 3.5 in the cover report. We've updated all our public-facing policy documents that are relevant to customer feedback. So you have the customer feedback policy, which is about how people provide feedback, what we will do with that feedback, and what we will do if we get things wrong. Our customer standards that relate to providing information and responding to general inquiries, and our reasonable adjustments policy, which is specifically to help to remove the barriers that some people experience in accessing services, including when they want to provide feedback. Alongside updating all our public-facing documents, we've updated all our internal procedures so that officers are clear about their roles and responsibilities. And all of that is supported by training. So we have training for all colleagues across the council on what good customer service looks like. And we've got training then for relevant colleagues on the use of the IT system and on specific responsibilities that some officers have with respect to directly dealing with complaints. So committee is asked to consider this work and specifically to improve the revised customer feedback policy, the customer care standards, and the reasonable adjustment policy. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Sue. Does any member have any question on this report? Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. Very happy with what's in this report. The only question I have is, obviously this policy meets the code and that everything is compliant with what we're required to do by law. What I was wondering, are there any parts of this where we go further than what we're required to do because we think it's best practice to do more? I know, for example, the reasonable adjustments, there are certain reasonable adjustments we're required to do by law, but obviously there is more that we could do if we chose to do so. So does this just meet the code, or have we at any point gone further? And if so, where have we gone further?
Thank you. Thank you. Through you, Chair. Then because we've looked at this comprehensively, we have ensured that we have adopted the code and responded to that. But by looking across everything, for example, updating our customer care standards was not part of the code, and updating our customer care standards so they reflect the current values that are part of the council, and also to update it in terms of the kind of ways people contact us. Gone are the days where people contact us predominantly on the phone, and so the online, and setting the right expectations around, if you contact us online, what our response time should be around general inquiries. So I would say that everything that is captured in the customer care standards is not part of the code, is something that we've done. The reasonable adjustments policy was something that through this work we identified as a gap. We felt we were not sufficiently clear about that, both in terms of how reasonable adjustments and expectations residents can have in accessing services, as well as through feedback. So we filled that gap by specifically developing that policy. And when you read the customer feedback policy, whilst it addresses the two-stage process around non-statutory complaints, it also amplifies what people can expect, how they can expect to be treated, what we can expect from them in terms of their treatment and respect for officers. And it also links out into a range of other processes, whether that be freedom of information requests, subject access requests, or processes that have appeal processes. So we've tried to give as clear and comprehensive set of information around all opportunities for feedback, which is above and beyond the code, which is quite specific. So I hope that helps to answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Ioannidis.
Just one. I may have missed something, so I just want to just clarify something. In regards to complaints, how will the policy prevent like a complaints ping pong, for instance, across directorates, and sort of how will it guarantee a single accountable owner per case?
Thank you very much. And I'll avoid going into too much detail, because we have set out that process in very detailed flowcharts to address that very point for officers. So when a complaint comes in, it is identified and sent to a triage team within each of the, so a core team, if you like, which sits within each of the directorates. We've identified who the lead is for those teams. We know who the people are in those teams, and then within that team, they can talk with the relevant service director or executive director to be assured that that complaint is then appropriately allocated to a specific person to respond to at stage 1 and a specific person to respond to at stage 2. If there are complaints that actually cover more than one area of the council or an interrelated area, we're very clear that actually there needs to be a sole person who's accountable for the response at each stage. So they may draw information from other colleagues, but that accountability is set out very clearly. And we have gone as far as not just identifying roles, but identified the names of those people in those roles at this moment in time, with a commitment to keep that up to date. So because we have obviously got commitments here to timescales for response, so it's really important that we can do exactly what you have suggested by your question, and get the complaint dealt with appropriately and swiftly to meet the timescales that are set out in the process by being clear who is accountable for what. So hope that helps. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Exactly what I was looking for. And you actually answered my follow-up. So brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other questions. Any debate on this? Councillor Hathorn.
So as a local member, you hear about complaints when they go wrong, and so the approach outlined here is good, and it's always good to look how to make it better and more streamlined. But I think alongside this, the council really has to think about how it addresses those complaints, which are complex and difficult. And as a local member, there's a sort of inner feeling when someone comes along with a complaint that is legitimate, and they really have a point, and when you want to pursue it. And I think thinking about how the performance report or whatever it is can really try to tease out those complaints and serve our residents as well as possible is the best thing we can do as a council and absolutely essential for trust.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments before we move to the vote? No. So can I see those in favour, please, of the recommendations to approve the customer feedback policy, the customer care standards, the reasonable adjustment policy, and to delegate authority for any adjustments to these policies to the Executive Director for Strategy and Partnerships in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of this committee? Those in favour, please. That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, members. So our next item is the Annual Health and Safety Assurance Report 2025. And we have with us Janet Atkin, who's the Service Director, Human Resources, and the Strategic Health and Safety Manager is also in attendance. Welcome, Janet. And we did mention earlier that this is your last meeting, for which we are all very sad, but we very much hope that you will enjoy doing what comes next. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. This annual assurance report on health and safety sets out the arrangements the Council has in place to meet our legal obligations in relation to health and safety. The report sets out for committee what the Council's health and safety governance framework looks like, an oversight of incidents reported during the previous 12 months, some of the key actions we've taken over the last 12 months to improve health and safety, and an overview of some of the further enhancements planned over the coming 12 months. The reports and the work of the health and safety team are underpinned by the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, which is the primary legislation governing occupational health and safety. This legislation sets out the responsibilities of employers, employees, and indeed self-employed people to ensure safety in the workplace. The Act and the supporting legislation set out in the report require employers to maintain a current health and safety policy, conduct thorough risk assessments of all of our work activity, and make sure we are accurately and adequately reporting incidents. They also provide the legal imperative to producing this annual assurance report. Our health and safety policy, which was shared with the report at Appendix B, fulfills our duties in relation to legal and governance requirements and clearly defines the roles and responsibilities from the Chief Executive through to all of our employees. The annual assurance report itself is set out in a slide deck at Appendix A. It confirms that our safety management system supports compliance and risk-based planning, but it also recognises that consistent implementation across our services does remain a challenge given the size and scale of the organisation. Performance highlights contained in the assurance report show some significant e-learning completion and increased engagements since its inception, positive improvements in our risk assessment submissions, and responsive learning and development support for all matters health and safety. Some of the achievements over the last year have been noted in the report and include a more concerted and targeted approach to stress risk assessments, which have been a key focus for the team over the last few months. The assurance report confirms that the Council maintains a robust governance framework and a well-established safety management system. It does acknowledge that there are challenges that require targeted action, and those are mainly around ensuring that there is full reporting of incidents, addressing some inconsistency with training attendance, making sure we have adequate funding for reasonable adjustments where they are required, and also making sure that our oversight of contractor safety and property compliance is sufficiently robust. The penultimate slide in the pack sets out some brief headlines around the support the Council offers us as employees, recognising that a strong and committed focus to wellbeing is a critical part of managing all of our health and safety as well. In summary, there will always be more to do to keep up with the emerging and evolving health and safety matters that arise in any workplace, but the governance arrangements we have in place corporately, led by the Chief Executive, mean that we are well set up to keep up the momentum and the scrutiny on this very important aspect of our responsibilities as an employer. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Janet. So are there, before I ask members for questions, Chief Executive wanted to make a point.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very conscious, Chair, that members in this very room debated a motion on Tuesday around violence towards shop workers and others, which was really important, and I was privileged to hear the debate on that from across all groups and all members. The fact that this report is coming before committee today actually provides me an opportunity to highlight some things both to the committee but also more publicly. Regrettably, over the course of the last 12 months, we have seen an increase in abuse towards the council's staff, towards the council's contractors, and that abuse has taken, sadly, a number of forms. We've had staff who have been spat at, sworn at, shouted at, physically assaulted, and that includes horrendous examples of people even having cars driven at them whilst working in highways areas. These incidents are all reported to us, but I just wanted to make clear, Chair, through you, that this council has a zero tolerance approach to this type of behaviour towards our staff and towards our contractors. That's not just because we have a legal duty of care towards these individuals providing essential services across the county, but because it's the right thing to do to safeguard them. And having that zero tolerance approach, we have expressly communicated that as an authority and will continue to do so. And I just wanted to reassure members, but also reassure members of staff that may hear this, that we do take action to report these incidents internally. They are reviewed, they are followed up on. My corporate leadership team receives notification of every single incident that's reported from a health and safety perspective on a weekly basis. We have extensive support arrangements in place for staff, and we do the same in follow-up with our contractors. But I also wanted to conclude, Chair, by making the point that where we think it's necessary, we will refer such incidents directly to the police for formal action. I do think it's a dreadfully sad state of affairs that we are seeing this increase, and it's not just across council services. As members debated, we see that in a number of parts of, unfortunately, society now. But I just wanted to make clear we will take action. We will not tolerate this towards our staff or our contractors, and we will also consider and have withdrawn service from some individuals where they've continued to abuse our staff. So, Chair, I appreciate that's a fairly firm statement, but I also think it's a really important statement. So thank you for the opportunity.
An absolutely necessary statement, and thank you very much for making it, Stephen. Members, any questions? Councillor Ioannidis and Councillor Meschini and Councillor Martin and Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. The report flags under-reporting, inconsistent training and contractor property compliance gaps. So I want to know what the immediate fixes are, who owns them, and what are the dates, obviously, to green. Thank you.
Thank you. So under-reporting is something that we are consistently messaging across the organisation. Stephen himself has used almost every opportunity to make sure that the messages are clear along the lines of what he has just recently said about the zero tolerance approach and how keen and committed we are as an organisation to supporting people, and we can't do that effectively if we don't know where the incidents are happening. So I would say that the incident reporting is improving, but it will take time. We just need to keep on messaging and not only sending out the messages to say that it's important to report, but to make it clear to people what we do with that information and how we act on it so that people understand that it is worth reporting as well. The other thing that we come across on a fairly regular basis is in some parts of the organisation, people almost assume that it's part of the job, and we always make the point that it is not part of the job. People should not expect to be treated badly. So I think the message I would like to get across is that we are consistently putting out these messages wherever we can, and we have a very robust governance arrangements around health and safety, whereby we have a corporate group that meets quarterly. And then there are separate groups led by each of the executive directors or one of their service directors in each area, where they look at all the reporting and they are responsible for communicating these key messages through their teams and making sure that we see consistent improvement.
Stephen.
Chair, if I can just supplement the response that Janet's provided and just reassure members that the policy itself sets out explicitly the roles and responsibilities of officers at various levels. That also aligns to the council's constitution. So, for example, in response to the question around who owns the issues around property compliance, I look to my right and the Executive Director of Finance and Resources, because Property Services sits with Michael. That is his direct accountability and responsibility. The same is true in respect of other functional areas. So, for example, around employee well-being, that sits with Janet. So the policy is set very clearly about who is accountable, who's responsible. The other point that I think is made in the report that's important to hear is not only do we get a weekly incident report updating us, and we have incidents tracked until they are closed with named owners against them, we also receive a monthly dashboard from our health and safety team and corporate property team to ensure that we're also tracking more broadly performance, issues around training compliance, issues around reporting, and really importantly, issues around improvement actions that we are being given by regulators or any other body. I think the final level of assurance is that our internal audit service also takes the opportunity to review how well these arrangements are being conducted, and Mairead and her team actually have reviewed this and continue to do so at my request. So I hope that provides a degree of assurance, but the accountability is clear in the policy. The governance reinforces that, as does the reporting and closure of incidents only when evidence is available to prove they've been dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Meschini.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions. Number one, how well are we doing? And hello, Janet. Thank you so much for coming, and we will miss you from the next meeting. Thank you so much for everything you've done. Two questions. How well are we doing tracking the levels of, for want of a better word, satisfaction amongst our staff for the support that they get internally for the problems that they report? And how, do we have a good grip on the kinds of things that are within our control? Because, I'm not at all talking about personal experience, but, a council staff member had a gun drawn on them in my division, which is how I know. And there isn't really very much that we can do directly to stop the mad guy doing that, but we can certainly make sure that the person in question is supported properly and feels that they're being taken seriously for the stuff that they have had to go through. So have we got that somewhere, and what are we doing to make sure that we are doing everything we can? The other question, which is relatively technical, under this policy, with which I have absolutely no problem whatsoever, and it's all great, what specific difference is there between a direct employee of the council having a problem and a contractor?
Thank you. So in terms of your first question, I think we have a very clear set of response arrangements in place. If an issue happens within a service to an individual member of staff, we hope that they will report it appropriately. Their managers have a responsibility to make sure those things are appropriately reported. That comes through a system through to Stuart's health and safety team, and that will then be picked up by the relevant health and safety business partner to engage with the manager, with the individual, to make sure that they are being appropriately supported. In some cases, it may be that it's appropriate for us to be reporting through the Riddle reporting system to the HSE. It may not. It may be something that we handle more locally. But between Stuart's team and also the wellbeing offer that we've got, which puts some sort of there's a rich offer there that we can share with people. In terms of what we hear, I think we've had some very positive feedback about how well people have been supported. I would never sit here and say it's been perfect, because I think there's always an element of how effective the management response is to the situation, whether it's reported in the first place. But I think our feedback has generally been that when people have reported, that appropriate support has been put in place for them to try and ensure things don't happen again, make sure that we would always do things like make sure there's an appropriate risk assessment in place. Does that need to be reviewed, changed, and so on? So from that perspective, feedback so far is good, as has been the feedback for the more general offer around the wellbeing that we provide for people. Your other question, I think, was around the difference when it comes to contractors. Stuart, do you want to pick up how we respond to that, please?
Yeah, we ask contractors to report if they're on our property doing work for us, but it's their responsibility to report back to their management for any incident they have. So if it was what we would call a RIDDOR reporting incident that we have to report to HSE, we would do that because it's on our property and it may have been our fault that the incidents happened. But we will also follow that up with their management to make sure, you know, we're looking to make sure they have reported it back, because we have had occasions where there's been an incident on our site, but they haven't told their management. So they're not getting the support from their management.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring Stephen in at this point. Stephen Moore.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just to supplement what Stuart said and on the technical question, clearly we have a legal duty for our employees, for people on our premises, and that includes not just contractors, but visitors and service users. I think the really important point Councillor Moschini's raised is, how do we know if contractors working on our behalf, if there are incidents and those are being properly supported? Stuart's point around ensuring that not only contracts have in them requirements for health and safety to be in place in respect of people providing services on our behalf, we do expect reporting. The example I was giving earlier of highways contractors, we do get regular reporting from our highways contractor if incidents occur, and whilst they've got the legal responsibility to ensure they safeguard the staff, we also expect to know about it because we may need to take further action as their commissioner, as their client, but also because it might be part of a broader picture that we need to report to the police or another agency. So yes, it's something that we continue to work at, but we always embed health and safety requirements in every contract that we issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question has just been answered by the Chief Exec, and in the question that Councillor Moschini around contractors and how we ensure compliance. But just as I've got the opportunity, I just want to put on the record mine and my group's support for everything that Stephen said at the start in regards to the protection and how much we look after our staff. You know, I think it's important that all of us as members recognise that the work that all of our staff do is important, and they shouldn't at any point be subjected to any kind of abuse or threats or what have you. So we have, my group and myself give the Chief Exec our full support in the actions that he's taking.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Martin. Councillor Wyatt.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to commend the work that's been done by officers on this and be glad that we are committed to not only delivering on our statutory obligations, but actually making sure that things are practical and workable. On that topic, I'm quite pleased to see that one of the next 12 months plans is to develop a personal protective equipment e-learning course. People find these things a bit tedious, but actually it's quite important to know how important having exactly the right kind of equipment is. I notice as well in the report that under equality and diversity implications, we mentioned that the Equality Act means that we must put in place reasonable adjustments for disabled people, which is true. But one of the other things covered by the Equality Act is also gender or sex, or however you want to describe it. In my capacity as Vice Chair for Highways, I was recently privileged to visit one of our highways depots where I got to see how things worked, and it was actually really fascinating. One of the requirements that we have for any person visiting a highways depot is to wear appropriate PPE. This is defined as being PPE 3, also you have to have the right number of stripes, it has to be the right color, it has to be all of this kind of thing. What it doesn't necessarily have to be is the right size. As a woman, I find myself frequently in male-dominated places, not able to sort of find easy access to certain things. And I'm very sad to say that on this occasion, it was the same. I was handed some PPE, which was the smallest they had and still 2 sizes too large, ill-fitting and awkward. For me, just visiting, that's probably fine. I wouldn't really expect them to have something to hand for me. But when I spoke to the female staff there, and there were female staff, they gave me the impression that this was sadly quite common. I think women in male-dominated environments, especially sort of, you know, the kind of rough kind of environments where you would expect people to do big, heavy work, may have come to expect this. And I think that's one of those kind of microaggressions that I'd like to see not happen anymore. I would like to ask the officers if we have any way of tracking how people feel about this, if there is appropriate methodology in place to make sure that all people of all shapes, sizes, and whatever get exactly the right kind of PPE, and if we can commit to making sure that this is happening in the future, please.
Thank you. I have to admit that's not something that I was aware of as a sort of live issue within the council. I've obviously heard this, but having just checked with Stuart, excuse me, excuse me, he tells me that it has been flagged with our health and safety business partner, Sarah Knott, who supports place and sustainability, and she is doing a piece of work on that at the moment. So hopefully in the not too distant future, you will see some progress reported on that. But thank you for raising it and making me aware.
That's very reassuring to hear. Thank you.
Thank you very much for an interesting question and answer. Councillor Murphy was next.
Thank you very much. And if I may say, Janet, working with you on staffing and appeals was an absolute joy, and we will miss you. I very much welcome this report. It's excellent. Just a question, a sort of technical question. Obviously, the whole thrust of it is it's about staff, and there's a governance sort of tie-in and everything. Would councillors technically be considered visitors in this report? I'm just curious. It's just a question. I didn't see councillors being referred to as a category of person in contemplation of this report, but I imagine we would be considered visitors.
So the councillors are of course not employees of the organisation, and this is a report we're required to produce for our employment responsibilities. Stuart tells me that the way we have approached this is that for councillors would be considered as volunteers rather than visitors onto the council's premises.
Thank you, that's really interesting.
Employees. I don't know if do you want.
Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah,
Stephen.
Chair, only because the Director of HR signalled that I should probably say something. It's really important that members are obviously covered by safety arrangements as well. As I'm sure members will be aware, we also provide things like security briefings for you. But I'm very mindful that the Health and Safety at Work Act creates particular legal obligations, and this is where I become very anarchic. So I think in law, members are defined as office holders rather than employees. And that creates a slight distinction, but nonetheless covering them by using the category volunteers. In effect, you are volunteering by putting yourself forward for democratic office, and that could lead us down a whole different timeline around discussion around allowances and time you have to spend working as elected representatives. But volunteers provides us to ensure that we can give the coverage in the policy and the arrangements. That's why I can also say with certainty we do things like risk assessments in relation to elected members. We will put in place personal evacuation plans for elected members where they're required. And I know that Michelle's team does that very carefully and keeps a close eye on all 61 of our elected members to ensure we support you as best we can. From experience in other authorities, I do think, however, the provision of security briefings from external agencies and personal safety training is something that's really important. I have regrettably seen, similar to the pattern I outlined at the start around our staff and contractors, I think we've all seen a rising tide of abuse and anger and violence directed towards political representatives of all parties, and I think that's hugely concerning. So we have an obligation to support you, but we also need to do that through providing training, briefing and advice as much as we can as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mrs. Rowe from Member Services has something to say.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add to that I've had 2 incidents reported to me. So if you do have something happen to you, then please contact me. And I have used the system that we are talking today to register those. So they have been registered like any other event would happen to a member of staff.
Thank you very much indeed. That's most reassuring. Councillor Ioannidis, did I see that you wanted a second bite at the cherry?
To be fair, most of the questions I did have been answered as it went round the room. But,
fantastic.
Just one thing in regards to reporting, I just had a thought. Do we log the proportions, or do we log the differentiation factors between contractors, volunteers, staff in these reports, so that we know if we're dealing with a contractor issue? Because obviously I would have expected as as a contractor, their main employer would have been is in charge of the policy, but if it's a RIDOR event, then we would have some sort of input in that. So it's just I would have assumed we do. I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, I can assure you we do. We have the reporting system that we have, or the information system that we have. It gives us the ability to provide reports that break the information down in that way. And we also track things like, we will look at the trends in the different types of abuse or incidents that are being reported and the reasons for them, which parts of the organisation they're occurring in, so that we can flag those. And as Stephen mentioned earlier, there is a lot of scrutiny on this information. It is looked at very closely by CLT weekly in terms of the major incidents that happen, but also quarterly in terms of what that profile looks like across the organisation.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tong was next.
Hello, I want to open by also reiterating the point, which is the fact that we've seen physical assaults against council officers, and that's absolutely horrific. They are really hard-working individuals that are doing such great work. And the fact that anger is directed at them instead of, well, anyone. But you could say if anyone's to blame, it's legislation and people far outside of the remit of officers. And it just feels so unfair they're getting the blame for these wider choices that they're just reacting and doing their jobs to. One thing I did want to see if I get some information on, and this may have been in the report, but I may have just forgotten about it. How has this changed over time? Are we seeing significantly more physical assaults than we have in the past? How has this number fluctuated? Because I think that's quite, well, we want to keep our staff safe. We want to make sure they're safe. And I think that would be interested to know, to just think about how we can react. I've got a second question, if that's okay as well, which is on a slightly unrelated note, which is I am really, really happy that teaching assistants and the struggles they face are specifically acknowledged here. I used to be a teaching assistant, and I think a lot of teaching assistants around the county feel really underappreciated. They're at the front lines of dealing with students, and you can face some real abuse, and it can be really, really hard. I've seen punches, kicks, rocks thrown at people's heads. It can be quite traumatic for a lot of people, and I think it's really good that the struggles that teaching assistants face and the issues with this are acknowledged. So I was also wondering if you could elaborate more on what's being done to try and protect and keep teaching assistants safe.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the reporting numbers, the numbers have increased in terms of the numbers of incidents that we've had, but it's difficult to, well, it's impossible for me to sit here and say that's because the number of incidents have increased. We've been pushing really hard to improve the reporting. So it may be that there's always been a higher level of incidents. They've just been more underreported. So that's something that we sort of are wrestling with. The numbers have gone up. They haven't gone up hugely. We still feel, as we've flagged in there, that there is a level of underreporting, because we hear when we talk, when I say we, specifically the HR team or the health and safety team, talk to people around the organisation, we do still have a sense that not all incidents are reported. People don't take the time to do it or don't see the need to do it. So we are flagging that. So I would say, sorry, it's a bit of a rambly answer. The short answer is they have gone up, but I can't tell you whether that's because there's more incidents or just better reporting at this point in time. We're still trying to get underneath that, I would say. In response to the teaching assistants, is there anything that you can share, Stuart, more granular detail?
Yeah, with teaching assistants, I have a health and safety business partner in my team, and any physical assault that comes in, if we're looking at trends, she will visit the school, she'll meet with the head teacher to look at why, she'll speak to SEND within the education sector and ask the questions and try to put things in place, make sure their risk assessments are up to date, their training and all that. So we do support them quite well.
Can I say thank you for that? And I think a lot of people will be really happy to hear that. So I'm glad that's on the record. And also, I really appreciate your detailed answer. And I'm glad work's being done to make sure officers can feel comfortable coming forward. Because if we're going to react to this serious issue, we need reliable data to work from. So yeah, thank you both for your work.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tong. Chief Executive.
Very briefly, Chair, I'm conscious that this could be discussed. I mean, Janet's described it. You could argue it's meant to be a virtuous circle. You improve reporting, and you therefore get more incidents coming through, and it starts to roll and roll and roll. You know, it's a bit more of a never-ending story, really, health and safety. So it's important that we continue to take that absolute focus on increasing rates of reporting. One of the areas that worries me most is we don't get enough reporting in near misses. That's not unique to this organisation. I've seen that across every employer I've ever worked in. But I do think it's really important that we continue to drive up the rates of reporting, because then we can analyse the trends and incidents, and particularly in schools, to Councillor Tong's point, I think we have to recognise we have a slightly different remit. We work directly with the grant-maintained schools, which are primarily our primaries. That's easy for me to say. But also we have to work very closely with the multi-academy trusts who take direct responsibility for the health and safety of their employees. So that adds a layer of complexity. But clearly Stuart and his team continue to provide advice and guidance to schools and are accessible to provide support. But I do think we continue to push reporting as a means to actually get better identification of issues, better identification and mitigation of risk, and fundamentally embed safety as a culture rather than just a process. And that's for me the key point that we're trying to achieve. So the policy is just how we frame that. This is about how people think, act and behave fundamentally. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Navarro is next, and then Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you also for the report, Janet. Really comprehensive. Following up on the Chief Exec's comment and on how contractor risks are being managed, can officers confirm whether the 5Cs contractor control system is being consistently applied across directorates, and whether recent audits have identified any gaps in contractor compliance or supervision?
Yeah, that's managed by our property compliance team. We have 5Cs controller contractors in all our maintained schools and all our properties, and they do manage that, they audit that and go out and check with our facilities management any contractor that they are signing in, following the procedures. An example of that is they wanted to do some work on one of our properties. They sent a risk assessment in a day before, and our property compliance manager refused them doing work because the actual wall had asbestos in it, and they wanted to sort of do some work, and he wouldn't let them. So they do manage it, and they are on top of it all the time.
Thank you very much indeed. And Councillor Keane, last questioner.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, the Chief Executive partially answered my question, which was about the near misses. There's obviously today's near misses, tomorrow's incident, and I was interested to find out what the take-up was of near misses, but also interested to see if we'd seen any trends in a near miss that prevented an actual incident happening.
Stephen is, of course, completely right. Our reporting of near misses is very low. And I completely agree with you, of course, that, you know, a near miss of today could be a serious incident tomorrow. So it's a message that we continue to get across, but it's something that has not got the traction that we need it to have at the moment. So again, work in progress, I would say, to make sure people understand that message that, as you've rightly said, acting early is something that can make a big difference. Thanks.
Thank you. That was an interesting question and one to take away and ponder, I think. Debate. Does anybody wish to debate this report? Not seeing any eagerness for that, so let us move to the recommendations, which are to approve the updated health and safety policy and delegate authority to the Chief Executive in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of this committee to finalise and publish the updated policy, and to review and scrutinise the annual assurance report to ensure the Council meets its statutory obligations and effective organisation of health and safety arrangements. Can I see those in favour of that, please? Another unanimous vote. Thank you very much indeed, members. So thank you very much, Janet, and farewell. And thank you also to Stuart. So we bring on Mairead now for our corporate risk register report. There is a confidential appendix to this report, which includes information relating to Risk 8, the Council is a victim of cybercrime report. If you wish to discuss this appendix, we will need to go into confidential session. However, I would like to discuss as much of this report in public as possible, preferably the whole of it, and take the vote in public. So does anybody wish to raise anything in relation to appendix Risk 8 in the appendix, which will require us to go into confidential session? No, thank you very much. That is hugely helpful. So Mairead is Head of Internal Audit and Risk Management and will introduce the report. Thank you, Mairead.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our regular report on the Corporate Risk Register, bringing updates since our previous report to this committee in July. I'll just highlight a couple of key things to note. So risk 3, which is the risk that the council does not have enough budget to deliver agreed short and medium term objectives, has increased in risk score from a 16 to a 20 and is outside the council's tolerable risk appetite. More information is set out in section 3.4, and this reflects the worsening financial position as set out in the Integrated Financial Management Report, which this committee has discussed earlier this afternoon. I should just note the figures given in section 3.4 were provisional at the time of writing the report. The forecast overspend for the year is currently at 12.3 million per the IFMR report discussed earlier today. Secondly, a new risk, risk 14, has been escalated to the register. This is the risk that a lack of effective relationships and governance across the integrated care system may lead to poorer coordination and worse outcomes for the population. This reflects the risks and challenges posed by changes to the NHS as a result of the NHS England 10-year plan, impacting on the structure of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Integrated Care Board, as well as other changes arising from budget reductions. More detail on this is available at section 3.5 of the report. The report also brings some other information regarding risk management activity, including around the CLT Risk and Assurance Group. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mairead. Any questions from members? Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, sir. I'm just trying to find my notes there. In terms of risk 3, it's obviously risen to 20. What immediate actions will bring it below 16, and can we meet that this quarter? And what is the quantified impact of each of the actions on the period end forecast? Thank you.
Deferring to Michael on that one.
Thank you, Chair. I think this will be something that will remain around this score, certainly into the next quarter. Refer back to the previous item. In terms of this will be reported back again in December through the Integrated Financial Monitoring Report. There are clearly some actions set out within the register here, but I think it's going to be one that will take some time to move in terms of the dial. And then the Section 25 report, again, that I referred to earlier, will pick up again further advice. So I think we will see some movement on this as we hopefully move into 2026. But clearly there are some uncertainties yet, such as fair funding, and clearly there are some other controls there which will be action between now and the end of this financial year, and I think we'll have one, if not two, updates of this risk register back to this committee at that point.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael. Any other questions? Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation, Mairead. Have we had any risks that have remained either static in the scores or even worsened despite us having mitigations put in place or actions taken? If so, what were they, and why did the mitigations not work?
Thank you. So within the main report, if you turn to section 3.3, at table 1, we give an overview of all the risks on the corporate risk register, showing the previous scoring from reporting to this committee in March, June, and then the current reporting, which reflects the September risk scoring. So that does show that there are a number of risks where the direction of travel on the risk has been static. The mitigations for those risks are set out individually within the corporate risk register, and probably it's slightly too large a question to answer in one go on the entire corporate risk register, but happy to discuss that or forward questions outside of the meeting.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Stephen, yes.
Chair, a comment to be helpful in response partly to Councillor Martin's question. One of the things that happens is also the corporate risk register is scrutinised by the Audit and Accounts Committee, and I have to say from experience of that committee, they do tend to go into quite a level of depth on some individual risks, and equally the executive directors report during the course of the year with their annual assurance statement to the Audit and Accounts Committee. So again, that allows members to scrutinise some of the risks in each of the areas with much more depth. Chair, if I may, while I have the microphone, I just wanted to talk briefly about Risk 14, the new one that's been added to the Corporate Risk Register. I think that was a very sensible addition to the Corporate Risk Register, given the reforms taking place to the NHS at present. Whilst we are seeing our current integrated care board for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough effectively sucked up to a sub-regional level, combining with Bedfordshire, Luton and Milton Keynes and Hertfordshire, so one of the biggest now in the country, covering around 3.5 million people. Actually, that's taking the focus away from the people of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So until new governance arrangements are implemented, I think it's right and proper that we have that on the risk register. I also think it's exceptionally helpful that it's already on the work programme for the Health Scrutiny Committee to look at these changes and the impact and implications. The bit that I think the executive directors rightly highlighted in this report in escalating this risk to you is not only have those reforms been implemented at, dare I say, breakneck speed, it's fair to say that they've been implemented in the way that actually they can't now deliver on the reforms. So what do I mean by that, Chair? What we currently have is a dreadful situation where we find colleagues in our Integrated Care Board for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough and constituent similar organisations in the other two counties concerned, many of whom are at risk of redundancy, but there is no funding available for those redundancies to be enacted. The Treasury has blocked the Department for Health from being able to spend funding on redundancies. So we have a perverse outcome with the NHS being told to cut running costs by 50% in integrated care boards, and people still being, in the wrong way of describing it, but bluntly, people still on the books, unable to exit, unable to have any certainty over their future, and the new cluster arrangements unable to actually be populated properly because the chief executives cannot make changes to their organisations and are encumbered with both costs and people that they don't know if they can either cover or release. It's probably the worst example of organisational change I've seen in 30 years of public service. You would never embark on something on that scale, and I'm saying this as the former National Director for HR for the NHS, of course. You would never embark on something on that scale without first having tested out the costs and making sure prudent financial availability to enact those changes was made. So I think I wanted to say that because that has noticeable and tangible impact on people that live in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough who are employed in these organisations, but is also a risk in terms of what happens to commissioning budgets for health services if the pressure is put on them to cover redundancy costs rather than provide NHS services. So this risk is really important and is one that we will develop over time. I also think the focus of the Health Scrutiny Committee on these changes as they apply to our services and the population of Cambridgeshire is really, really important. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Navarro.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, following on the Chief Exec's comments, I am very glad to see that this is a new and escalating risk to that level. So given the exclusion of county councils from the formal governance structure of the integrated care boards under the new 10-year health plan, what steps is Cambridgeshire County Council taking to ensure that local democratic accountability and public health priorities remain central to the strategic commissioning decisions? How do we intend to maintain influence and representation in shaping the future of integrated care in our region?
Indeed, yeah. Over to Chief Executive.
Chair, thank you. Without wanting to take us too far off corporate risk register, I'll just say that the NHS reforms do not technically go fully live until April next year. They haven't actually got legislative approval, so they're almost working in shadow form right now. That means I still retain a voting non-executive role on the Integrated Care Board, both for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, but in the new clustering arrangements until April next year. In terms of local system accountability, the NHS are proposing to set up, which feels just like a classic solution to a problem they didn't need. They're going to set up a Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, effectively a neighbourhood level committee reporting into their new cluster. So almost recreating what they have now, just at a different level. We would expect strong representation from across the various bodies within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough to be at that level. However, we will have a constrained voice at the sub-regional or cluster level, and there is a discussion that's required with the directly elected mayor, because where directly elected mayors are in place, such as in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, those responsibilities from April are intended to transfer to the mayor or their representative to represent Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So that's a discussion both myself, the Chief Executive of Peterborough City Council, and the Combined Authority Chief Executive are having initially. So we will need to follow that through. But I do again think that the governance changes that the NHS are making are actually taking away local voice, local accountability, and local ability to influence strategic commissioning. I am, however, pleased to say that alongside the other 7 upper tier chief executives in the new cluster, we have been quite robust with the new chair and the cluster chief executive about needing directors of public health to be represented in their own right. They weren't initially going to be, but we understand that that's something the new chair has relented on. So there will be a director of public health as a minimum in the cluster board, because they have an independent statutory role that needs to be respected. I hope that's helpful, and apologies for the diversion off into health policy, Chair.
Indeed. Okay, thank you. Is there any debate to be had now on this report? Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, I mean, I want to come back to risk 3, the budget. I'm personally not happy that it's risen to 20, red and above the appetite. What I gained from the question that I asked was that the current trajectory of the budget is unsustainable. Therefore, that's going to affect all our services, all our residents, and everything we do within council. So I think this is of the highest priority, according to what I'm viewing here. So we need action, and I think we need action immediately. I mean, from the response that I got, what I heard was that it's unlikely with the actions we're taking, it's unlikely to change, and we're hoping that in 26 things are going to improve. I mean, our residents don't vote for us for hope; they vote for us to make change and to deliver. So, I would highly recommend that we put extra pressure to get this under control. I'm not happy with this rising, and I suggest I assume that you're all not happy as well. So I think we need to be putting extra pressure on this risk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ioannidis. I would like to say that it is a legal obligation on this authority, as on every other authority, to set a balanced budget. We will do so when it comes to the budget setting meeting. Officers are working extremely hard to identify how we can do that and to make sure that we do. Nobody is complacent, but as councillors of authorities, particularly upper tier authorities of all political colours across the country, are finding promising to cut taxes and to make savings are easily made and not so easily delivered. Councillor, sorry, no, I'm going to ask Section 151 officer to come in, whose duty it is to sign off that the budget we're setting is sustainable.
Thank you, Chair. And it's just a point of clarity in terms of the comments there and the interpretation of my comments. In terms of hope, what I was referring to was our earlier conversation in relation to the Integrated Financial Management Report, where we are seeing positive action being taken to reduce this. I don't see that the red risk will reduce in the quarter that we are now in and just in. I would see that if the current trajectory in terms of managing our spend continues, that there is a possibility that this risk could reduce in the final quarter of the financial year as we move to, if you like, Judgment Day on the 31st of March. And we'll have a greater element of forecasting. We'll also have a greater understanding of the funding outcome from central government, which is expected circa the 18th of December. So in terms of that hope, it is based on actions that are being taken, but clearly we have to reserve our judgment at this moment in time. Or I have to reserve my judgment at this moment in time based on the information that's put before us. However, what I do absolutely agree with is that this is a significant issue and needs to be tackled by the council and is a key focus, and then that's why we've raised it as an increasing risk. And I think one of the points, just come back to an earlier point, is it talks about adequate reserves, and sorry, not adequate reserves, forecasting of demand in the very first line of the controls, and we scored that adequacy as reasonable. What we have seen is that I think 73% of children coming into care were unknown to us when we were setting the base budget. That's a significant cost and has driven a significant cost. So clearly improving forecasting and what lessons we will take and are able to take from that will influence our ability to assess the 26-27 and my assessment around reserves. So there is significant work going into this risk, as it should be, and therefore it needs to be a key priority.
Thank you very much indeed. Very, very briefly,
Very brief. I just wanted to say thank you. That was actually what I was looking for. I wanted to hear that we're going to be improving forecasting, because that is for me a key aspect in getting this resolved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Meschini.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll try to be very, very brief. First of all, may I register my commiserations to Councillor Bowden. He's not here. I know how much he loves debating this item every single time. So we are thinking of you. I almost asked this as a question, and then I thought I wouldn't, but I think it might have been useful perhaps if I had before the previous comments were made. I wonder if we want perhaps a little bit of a different narrative about that particular risk, because I would expect that risk to be higher always at this time of year, because this is when we've got the budget gap which has been identified. We haven't had the local government settlement, we haven't had the grants, and we haven't made the decisions about council tax or fees and charges or everything else. So those are the kinds of things that will come into play as we come closer to that decision that we're going to make in February. What would be perhaps more interesting in terms of how high is the risk, how high is the risk that we won't be able to set a legal budget? And I would expect that risk to be managed in such a way that it is always low, because you kind of want to reduce your risk that you will break the law in that sense. And also, I mean, I know Tom isn't in the room, but if Tom was in the room, you know, the many years that we spent working on budgets together, he was always very wary of us saying, well, you know, by the time the deadline is upon us, everything will sort itself out, and you don't want to be in that sort of complacent situation. But in order to avoid not just so much unnecessary alarm, but perhaps the wrong narrative being set and the wrong problem being seen, perhaps we want to think about how we present that risk, and maybe you could take that away and think about it, and that's it.
Thank you for that suggestion. Yeah, the unofficial members risk geek group has 2 members, actually, Councillor Bowden and myself. It has yet to meet, but it's very enthusiastic. Councillor Tong.
I also wanted to briefly comment on the subject of the budget and also address this point that I think perhaps the framing is a bit off and how it's been discussed is a bit off, because even though I have disagreements with the budget, I have disagreements with the priorities, officers and members have been working hard to make best use of this budget, and it is a budget that was, you know, confirmed by officers and went forward with and approved. So I don't think it's as simple as just saying something a bit nebulous, like, can we just sort of do better with the budget? What needs to be done is, if members have better ideas, and I'll address you, the chair, again, if Councillor Ioannidis wants to have suggestions with the coming budget, I think that's the best time to make these decisions heard. It can't really be done now, mid-year, when we're starting to see some difficulties which are largely outside of the council's control. These are national issues. So I just wanted to try and reinforce the fact that I think it's a little bit more complicated than just try harder. It is related to a whole bunch of external issues.
Thank you, Councillor Tong, and all members, of course, will have the opportunity to contribute through their groups, their ideas at budget time. Councillor Wyatt.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, my understanding of this item is not the risk that we don't have enough budget to, that we aren't able to balance the budget nor deliver all of our statutory obligations. It's the risk is that we don't have enough budget to deliver our short and medium term corporate objectives. So the problem that we have as a council is that a lot of our funding and our duties are unpredictable. We don't know how many SEND kids are going to need to get to school. We don't know how many people are going to need to go into care. The best thing that we can do is estimate this. And if we want to take a very risk-averse approach, we can overestimate the cost of those things. We can overestimate the cost of them, and that leaves less budget in order to do the things that we'd really like to do that we don't necessarily have to do, like fix every pothole. I think if we want to reframe this, it might be better to consider whether or not we actually want to reduce our ambitions, because if we do that, we might have less risk on this table, but we would also achieve less. And we might end up with higher reserves, which could be something we want to consider, but we would also achieve less. And we may end up achieving less in the short term, but then those problems will mount up if we don't address things that need to be addressed now. I think that it's reasonable to be slightly overambitious and have this risk of not meeting every objective because of something nebulous in the future. I don't know how other people feel about that.
Thank you very much. That's a typically thought-provoking set of comments, beautifully expressed. So having debated this, I'm going to move to the vote, which is simply that we note the risk register. So I think we've noted it, haven't we? So thank you very much, and thank you, Mairead, as always. So item 11 is the corporate performance report, and Sue Grace, as Executive Director Strategy and Partnerships, will introduce this, but the other executive directors will be on hand to respond to any questions regarding their directorates. So Sue, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the report in front of you today captures the council-wide performance for Q1 of this financial year. So that's the period from April through to June. It's set out in the format that this committee saw for the first time in the annual report, which you received at your meeting in June of this year. So you have here 87 strategic key performance indicators reflecting the work of the entire council. Paragraph 3.4 has a summary of the status across those indicators, and the detail is set out in Appendix 1. This report aligns with today's other items covering finance, risk, business planning, quality of life and change. And together they bring together the whole picture of resident feedback, organisational change, council spend, risk and performance. As we progress through this current financial year, 2025-26, we will continue to refine our approach regarding performance reporting, and this will include further work on consideration of targets and tolerance levels in preparation for the annual report that you'll receive next summer. So just a heads up towards next summer. Appendix 2 amplifies information in Appendix 1 for the services that sit within the remit of this particular committee. And as the Chair has said, colleagues, executive directors are here to address any specific questions that you may have related to their areas of performance. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Sue. Questions for members? Councillors Murphy, Hathorn and Martin.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate having a rich data source looking at performance and coming to this committee. That is excellent, and that the other committees feed into this. In the interest, there are many aspects of this that it would be really interesting to discuss. One of them I will focus on, if I may, and I indicated this earlier this morning, which is indicator CYP 005. This is the percentage of EHCP assessments completed within a 20-week time frame. And I'm also referencing, so that's page 33 of today's papers, but also we have the same information slightly differently presented in the CYP report that came to the last committee. I just want to be really clear about what this metric shows and what it doesn't show, so that we really understand what we are looking at. And the CYP papers say that when we talk about the percentage of EHCP assessments completed within a 20-week time frame, what that is looking at the number that are completed in a month. Say June, that would be 67. And of those 67, how many were completed within a 20-week time frame? So in this case, it's 0%, because presumably we are looking at the backlog, the ones that have been around for longer. So when we look at this figure and it says it's 0% for those months, actually, that's not a problem. That is looking at the applications or the assessments that have been around longest and most need addressing. So in a sense, and it also doesn't look at the sort of totality. So for example, in June, we had 275 referrals in, but we were only completing 67. So there is a totality of referrals in the system which we're not seeing, and we're also not seeing how many of these assessments are being done within between 20 and 30 weeks, between 30 and 40 weeks. We don't see where they all are at this point in time. So I feel that on the one hand, I would like to just ask, please, that this metric is really, that whenever we have it, that we're really clear what it does mean. It's obviously a statutory requirement, or a requirement that we have that metric. But could we also please consider in future, as we want to review the overall performance, because people who've had their EHCP waiting for more than 20 weeks are very deserving of our attention and urgency, and we need to understand that those applications or those assessments are taking longer. That's part of our, that's got to be part of our remit, as well as just looking at the statutory metric that we are required to do. So I would ask, please, for something, a couple of more measures to look at to give a more rounded picture, as well as the clarity about the statutory assessment that we have to do.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. I think that was probably more a debate point than a request for an immediate response, was it? If so, I will move on to Councillor Hathorn.
It follows on quite well from Councillor Murphy's point. So it's about the Category 1 and Category 2 faults fixed within the timeframe for highways, and I asked about this at Highways and Transport Committee. And currently the KPI looks at the time between the report being picked up by an officer and the contractor fixing it. So it ignores the time between the fault being reported and the officer looking at the fault. The reason why I think this KPI is so important is because it is a really significant public kind of window into the performance of the county council. In almost every other area, if I make a complaint or make an observation about how performance could be improved, it is a private interaction that I as an individual have with the county council. If I report a fault on the report a fault system, I can see every other live case, and I can't see the data is completely anonymized, but I can see what people have submitted where, and I can see the date which they have been, where the report has been submitted. And when you look at that, it does not give you the confidence that 90% of faults are being fixed, because there are a lot, and there are always faults that you see which are 5 or 6 or whatever months outstanding. And I recognise that to date the system has been extraordinarily challenging, and significant improvements have been put in place as of September and over the summer, and these have yet to bed in. But I think it's really important that we try to find KPIs which are addressing the performance of the contractor, the performance of the county council officers, and also the progress we are making in addressing the backlog. So I guess the question is this something that can be that we can see?
Through you, Chair, so thank you for the question, Councillor Hathorn. So the current indicator in this pack relates to defects in the highway that are picked up by our proactive inspection. So that's inspections undertaken by officers. First thing I can confirm is that we do now inspect the highway within the required timeframes. It's above 98% of inspections are completed within the required timeframes, and this measures the time taken for defects to be repaired based on those inspections. But as you quite rightly highlight, we've now introduced a new asset management system which improves the way that customers can report potholes and other defects. And in terms of additional measures, what we want to be able to include in here is a measure around the time taken from the point of inception when the issue is first reported by customers, the speed of that repair and the quality of that repair. So I think it's really important that we get some customer information in here and the time taken for customers to have their repairs and their faults highlighted and then repaired, as well as the officers. So that's something we are doing, and we had a similar question at Housing Transport Committee, and we gave the commitment that we would provide that information in future performance reports to that committee.
So what I didn't raise at that committee was working through the backlog, and I think that's a really important measure for members to see.
Just confirm that was also something we can provide as additional information. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I'll touch on the CYP comments in the debate, but just looking at the performance indicators regarding to this committee in particular. So SRP 001, freedom of information, sits at amber. If we could just have an update on why we're underperforming, that one would be useful. And then the second one is SRP 003. How this is presented in front of us makes it look like the last employee engagement survey we did was December 2023. Now, somehow I can't believe that's the case, and if it is, I'd be rather concerned. So if it isn't, can we get an updated figure on this and obviously a target as soon as possible so we can track this one more regularly? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And just to say, in terms, if I take your last point first around the satisfaction of staff, then we have carried out a survey this year. So we committed to doing it every other year. And the survey was completed in September. The analysis is underway at this moment. And there's a consistency, again, between the sets of questions. And it was carried out independently, again, by the same organisation, so that we've got that independent approach and confidence in the methodology. And so the results of that will be certainly fed through in terms of the reporting to this committee. And obviously the staffing committee will have detail on that. And there will be, as we had last time, a detailed action plan that results from that in order to be able to both see where we've improved from the previous survey or where things perhaps haven't improved and what we need to do as a result. So I hope that gives you some reassurance on that point. In terms of the first question around freedom of information, I think if that can be noted by colleagues in Democratic Services, we'll take that away and get a more specific response on freedom of information, unless the Chief Executive can address that point directly now. Don't know. No, we'll take that question away. No, shouldn't have put him on the spot, but thank you. We'll deal with that outside of the meeting. Thank you.
Very much. Any more questions from members? Any debate? Not seeing any. So was that a debate point? Yes. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just wanted to pick up on the points that Councillor Murphy made. Obviously, she is the chair of CYP, and just wanted to pick an issue with some of the wording. I'm sure it was just a slip, but it is concerning nonetheless to those that are listening at home. You mentioned that having 0% within 20 weeks isn't a problem. it is a problem. It is something that we need to be looking at. So I'm sure it was a slip, but I think it just needs to be clarified for the public record, because there will be people watching today. Their kids are struggling to get the support that they want and need under law. To hear the chairman of that committee say that it's not a problem, I think is just something that I think needs to be clarified. Because this
Thank you. Should we
is
give
a
her the
big issue.
opportunity to clarify it then? Thank you.
I'm very happy to clarify that it was entirely in the context of, if you look at 0%, it looks like nothing is happening at all, whereas what it means is we've been tackling the even longer outstanding applications. So it isn't 0%. It's not good that we haven't met it within 20%, but at the moment we don't quite know how many plans, referrals for plans are outside of the 20-week, and we need to know the full picture, because we don't want to create a perverse incentive to only do the simple ones that can be done within 20 weeks and all the rest left, because the government requires one particular metric and doesn't take into account everyone else. So we want everyone to be seen. We want the metric to be 100%, but we do want it to be 100% of the people who have applications in, not just of the things that we managed to do in the month.
Thank you very much for that. So we've been asked to scrutinise and comment on the performance information presented. I think we have done that. So are we happy that we have done that? Yes. Thank you very much indeed, members. And thank you, Sue, for introducing that report. So we now move on to the final item, which is the committee agenda plan, training plan, appointments to outside bodies and internal advisory groups and panels, and the appointment of member champions. So I'm going to ask Mrs. Rowe, as Democratic Services Manager, to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be quick. The agenda plan, we've added an item to the next meeting on the economic strategy, I think an action plan. And in relation to appointments, there is a vacancy on the Huntingdon's Freeman's Trust. Now, this trust covers Huntingdon Town itself. I did ask for nominations, and I've received no nominations from Huntingdon Division members, but I have received a nomination from Councillor Bulat. Although she doesn't represent a Huntingdonshire division, she does live in Huntingdon. So I'm just asking the committee whether that is acceptable.
Just for clarification, I believe that Councillor Bulat does represent a Huntingdonshire division, just not a Huntingdon division. So can I see any objection to appointing Councillor Bulat to that post? It seems the most appropriate. No, we are all happy with that. Thank you very much. Is there anything else anybody wishes to raise on the agenda plan, training plan, etc., etc.? No? Okay, thank you very much indeed. So we have noted that, which means that we are all done just 2 minutes over our expected finish time. So thank you very much indeed, everybody, and well done.